Chapter 1056. That was an opponent with 300,000 soldiers. With only 400 people, it was easy to guess what kind of situation would occur. Everyone knew that the entire battalion of Lung Feng brothers was probably going to be wiped out. What should we do? 1st Regiment Commander Bu Hai walked in front of Tian Su and asked for instructions. His mood was very heavy since this battalion of soldiers belonged to his regiment. Stop advancing. Plant landmines to stop the enemy from advancing. Then retreat in batches. Even though Tian Su wanted to lead his brothers to charge forward, his rationality told him that this was not the time to fight. There were still many people in the shelter who had not retreated. They had not completed their mission, and could not do as they pleased. 1st Regiment Commander Bu Hai also had an indignant look on his face. He was sad that he couldn't save his comrades, but he also knew that the decision of his division commander was correct. With just one division, it was impossible for them to defeat the 300,000 enemy, not to mention the existence of the cavalry. Plant landmines and retreat as we fight, Bu Hai said with hatred. The moment he turned around to carry out the order, tears flowed out uncontrollably from the corner of his eyes. At the front line, grenades were detonated one after another. Cold vanguard soldiers died together with the enemy cavalry. Not even their bones were left behind. In just 15 minutes, the 100 soldiers of the 1st Battalion had all died. Battalion Commander Zhou Shirshue's eyes were filled with tears as he gave another order. 2nd Company forward. Even though they knew that they would die without a doubt if they charged forward, the 2nd Company commander and all the soldiers did not hesitate at all. After agreeing, they all ran out of the trench. If one looked closely, one could see that everyone was holding at least 2 grenades in their hands. It was clear that they were prepared to take the enemy down with them. Boom! Boom! Another explosion sounded. 2nd Company down. 3rd Company down. Very quickly, the 3rd Company was also gone. When only the 4th Company was left, Zhou Shishue also took out 2 grenades and held them in his arms. He also took out his Type 5 gun. He would rather die than let the gun fall into the hands of the enemy. The gun would be there if the person was alive, and the gun would be destroyed if the person was dead. This was the death rule that the cold vanguard soldiers had to abide by. Comrades, we won't die in vain. The 6th young master will definitely avenge us. Everyone, charge with me. Following Zhou Shirshue's shout, hundreds of soldiers rushed out of the trenches in a scattered formation towards the incoming cavalry. Every one of them looked like they were ready to die, with smiles and satisfaction on their faces. Boom, 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 boom. The sounds of explosions were endless. This was a heroic song, a song composed by the soldiers of the Cold Vanguard. They used their actions and their lives to illustrate what it meant to fight to the last second, what it meant to die a worthy death, and what it meant to die a worthy death. Zhou Shirshue's 1st Battalion of 400 soldiers had all died in exchange for the 5-star Army's time to retreat. Other than the rations that they brought with them, the rest were all burned. They didn't leave anything for the enemy. It was just that because they were in a rush, out of the 50,000 civilians, only 10,000 were brought away. It was just that once the war started, the situation was too chaotic. They didn't listen to orders and ran around randomly. There were even some who directly escaped to the barracks of the Little South Ming Army. The 5-star Army took the initiative to retreat into the Liangshan rainforest. Once they entered the forest, there were giant trees everywhere. If one were to enter the forest without any experience, he or she would be surrounded by danger. This kind of natural protective environment stopped the Little South Ming Army and the Bangladeshis from chasing after them. After the battle, they destroyed the 5-star Army's shelter and captured 40,000 civilians. Although they did not manage to snatch the rations, Zhu Huijin was still very satisfied with the harvest. That was the 5-star Army. It was said that they were very powerful, and no one dared to go against them. Now that they were chased away by him, didn't that mean that he was much more powerful than the 5-star Army? After the 5-star Army was chased away, the arrogant Zhu Huijin decided to go to the troop division. He wanted to eliminate the remaining troops of Shi Pingwang and completely eliminate the hidden dangers left here. Once the rear was stable, it would be time for him to go to the east and attack the Great South Ming Army. Yang Chendong received the news that the Little South Ming army had attacked, and the shelter was forced to retreat. When he heard this, he was not as anxious as before. The Little South Ming army had 300,000 soldiers, and this was only one area. If the Little South Ming King's army was included, this number would probably double. However, he only had 2 cavalry divisions, and no matter how good he was at fighting, it would be difficult for him to win against so many enemies. Moreover, most of the enemies were Han Chinese, and unless it was absolutely necessary, he did not want to make an enemy out of the Han Chinese and cause internal strife. Inform the 100,000 foreign troops behind us, and tell them to hurry up and meet up with us. Tell the cavalry brothers to stop and rest for 3 days. Take good care of the war horses and rest. After days of rushing, even Yang Chendong felt a bit tired, let alone the ordinary cavalry soldiers. 6th Young Master. Our brothers from the 1st Cavalry Division can hold on. Hearing that they were going to stop, Division Commander Tian Hu did not know what was going on ahead, volunteered. With their level of training, it was just rushing for days. It was not a big deal. The division commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Lu Zhua, also wanted to take the opportunity to say that they could continue. However, Yang Chendong waved his hand and said, "I told you to rest, so rest. This is an order." With a simple sentence, the 2 division commanders stopped talking and started to carry out the order. The army stopped at the border between Laos and Yunnan province and started to rest. After Yang Chendong got off his horse, he took the letter that said that the Little South Ming army was marching towards Cheli Division. After reading it, he threw it aside. Speaking of which, what did Shiping King's order have to do with him? He wanted more of these dog-eat-dog situations to happen. Yang Chendong did not care about Shiping King Mubin's life, but he cherished his own life. Not long after he settled down in Cheli Division, he received news that King Guangtong Zhu Huihua and the Bangladesh army were coming for him. He was so shocked that he almost fell off his chair. He quickly asked someone to call Wang Ji, the former Minister of War, and Muong over to discuss countermeasures. After a short meeting, the 3 of them agreed on the same thing, which was to retreat. At this moment, they only had 50,000 Mu clan soldiers in their hands. Among them, only 20,000 were true elites. No matter what, they would not be a match for 300,000 enemies. Even if they knew that they could not win, why fight? It was better to retreat and preserve their strength. We can't bring all 50,000. There are too many people. We can't supply enough food, Wang Ji said. Then we'll only bring 20,000 elites. Mu Bin was also very generous. He decided to leave 30,000 soldiers behind. Muong wanted to say something, but after thinking for a while, he decided not to. In his opinion, a good general would not abandon his soldiers at will. But now, the situation was urgent. For their own safety, they had no choice but to make some painful decisions. Mu Bin did not announce the decision to leave 30,000 Mu soldiers behind. Instead, he said that he would take 20,000 elites to attack the enemy's flanks. When the time came, they would attack from 2 sides. Out of trust in King Shiping, the 30,000 Mu soldiers believed him and stayed in Cheli Division. However, when they were surrounded by a large number of soldiers and did not see King Shiping appear, they realized that they had been deceived. These people were also straightforward. Since they knew that they had been abandoned, they might as well just surrender. Like this, Zhu Huihua took down the 30,000 Mu army without shedding a drop of blood. He took down Cheli Division and his strength increased greatly. As for the 20,000 elite Mu soldiers that Mu Bin brought with him, no one knew where they went. It was as if they had disappeared into thin air. However, Zhu Huihua thought that the other party only had 20,000 people. They could not cause any trouble. Zhu Huihua did not care about it. The most important thing was that he had received news that Bugnam of Gojoseon was coming to him with his men. This attracted all his attention. Bugnam of Gojoseon Yang Chendong's debut was like a mystery from the beginning. Even if the 5-star army now had great power, it was still puzzling how he rose to such a scale. It was as if there was an additional force in the realm. In particular, ever since the establishment of the 5-star army, it had been successful in every endeavor. No opponent seemed to be able to stop their vanguard. This made his status even more legendary. Just based on this, Zhu Huihua wanted to have a battle with him. He wanted to see if the other party was really as powerful as the legends said. Zhu Huihua was still thinking that if he could defeat Bugnam of Gojoseon, his name would be spread all over the world. At that time, it would not be impossible for him to seek the title of emperor. Yes, Zhu Huihua had always been very ambitious, especially when it came to his brother, the former King Minzhuang, the current King Little Nanming. Zhu Huihua had always wanted to replace his brother, but he just lacked the right opportunity. Now that he had more than 300,000 troops in his hands, he believed that the opportunity had come. As long as he could defeat the 5-star army led by Bugnam of Gojoseon, then he would have the qualifications to challenge his brother. He would also usher in his own career and glory. Having confidence was one thing, but the battle record of the 5-star army was there. Moreover, they also had firearms. All of these made Zhu Huihua have no choice but to deal with them. He called over a group of generals and began to discuss the strategic arrangements. When it came to war, this person still had some ability. More than 300,000 soldiers were spread out according to his arrangements, scattered in the borders of Yunnan and Guangxi. It was guaranteed that as long as the 5-star soldiers left Langshan, they would be able to pounce on them like locusts, encircling them and eating them. Time passed day by day, and both sides began to make arrangements. Yang Chendong also waited for the arrival of the 100,000 foreign allied troops. Under his command, the 100,000 troops were divided into 5 divisions. Each division had 20,000 people. Chapter 1057. Furthermore, he had chosen 4 company leaders from the Black Cavalry to be the division commanders. These people had already displayed their talent and ability to command troops. Now that they finally had the chance to lead troops, their wishes had been fulfilled. These 5 people were the 1st Regiment Commander Niu Duo, the 2nd Regiment Commander Tu Hai, the 3rd Regiment Commander Luan Xiaojiang, the 4th Regiment Commander Chu Duo, as well as the 5th Regiment Commander Mo Benyi. The 5 of them were all promoted to senior colonel, and could be considered to have been promoted to the front lines. The 5 foreign races, the 1st Cavalry Army, and the 1st Cavalry Division, a total of 120,000 people had passed through Yunnan Province and the rainforest, heading straight for Langsun. While waiting for the army to arrive, Yang Chendong had also thought about how to deal with the Han army. Although he did not wish for the Han people to exhaust themselves, it was just a thought in his mind. Since it was a war, there would always be deaths. Blindly thinking about settling the southern Ming issue peacefully was not going to work. Only by fighting a few battles and letting the other party feel pain and fear would they be able to sit down and negotiate. Sometimes, the truth was decided through fighting. Regardless of whether Yang Chendong wanted to admit it or not, this was the truth. Since that was the case, he would just fight. After making up his mind, Yang Chendong changed his hesitation and gave the order to advance. However, he added a sentence at the end, that there was no need to be courteous when facing the Bangladesh army. If they could kill, then kill. Only when facing the Han army, if they could capture, then capture. For this reason, he set a standard for the 100,000 foreign races. What reward would they receive for killing 1 person? What reward would they receive for killing 3 people? What reward would they receive for capturing 1 person? What reward would they receive for capturing 3 or more people, etc.? The 100,000 foreign races who had originally wanted to use the military to change their lives were all excited when they saw the reward system. They knew that it was time to realize the value of their lives. As long as they performed perfectly, not only would they benefit, even their families would also benefit. As a result, the morale of the army was extremely high. Once they left the rainforest area, they would have a showdown with the Southern Ming Empire's army. In order to fight this battle well, long before Yang Chendong arrived, the 7th Army had already sent out all of their scouts. In addition, Chief of Intelligence Yang Chendong had also sent out a large number of department elites to the 2 provinces to investigate the enemy situation. Thus, Zhu Huiqiu's military arrangements could be said to be extremely clear to Yang Chendong. Looking at the summary of intelligence collected by various departments, Yang Chendong couldn't help but sigh. This Lord Guangtong is not an idiot, he's really something. This judgment was based on Zhu Huiqiu's battlefield layout. From the intelligence, the enemy's military arrangements were very appropriate and orderly. It could basically guarantee that once one area was attacked, the other armies could quickly provide support. If things went wrong, the 5-star army would be entangled, and then be drowned by the enemy's human wave tactics. The sand table was placed in front of him. Yang Chendong called over the 7 division commanders under him, and let them understand the enemy's battlefield layout. When the red and black flags were placed in the 2 provinces, Tianhu and the others were all shocked. Yang Chendong knew why they were shocked. After all, when he first received the news, he also sincerely praised them. Thus he wasn't surprised. Instead, he smiled and asked the 7 division commanders, "Come, tell me, what do you think?" To be able to show their faces in front of the 6th young master, naturally, no one wanted to let go of this opportunity. At that moment, Lu Zhua, as a veteran division commander, was the first to speak. "6th young master, from what I see, this Lord Guangtong is quite capable. Look at his layout. It can be said that he is prepared to defend to the death. Especially the territory near Liang Mountain. It is like an iron bucket. If my guess is correct, they should want to trap us first. Then after a war of attrition, they will gather their superior forces to fight us to the death and finally eat us." Humph, Division Commander Tianhu sneered. He was laughing at Lord Guangtong's overestimation of his strength. Yang Chendong was also laughing. Although this time they brought a mixed army, they were not inexperienced on the battlefield. The war in Siam allowed these 100,000 people to grow. Although there was still a big gap between them and the real elites of the 5-star army, such as the Cold Front, they could at least be regarded as a B-class army. As long as they were used well and their morale was boosted, winning this battle would not be a problem. The other 5 division commanders who led the foreign army had different expressions on their faces. However, it could be seen that they were not frightened. Instead, they were eager to try. This was their first battle after becoming division commanders. Naturally, everyone wanted to perform well. Taking in everyone's expressions, Yang Chendong looked at Tianhu and said, "Come, Division Commander Tian, tell us, what do you think?" Yes. Although he was already a major general, in front of Yang Chendong, Tianhu was still a student. He first stood at attention, then took a wooden stick from the side and pointed at the sand table. "Everyone, please look. After leaving Liang Mountain, 200 miles to the west is Yongji City. To the north is Linshan, and to the west is Siming Prefecture. This is like a pocket. Once someone enters, it can be firmly blocked. This is also the problem we will encounter after leaving the mountain." "That's right." The other division commanders, including Yang Chendong, nodded gently. Obviously, everyone agreed with this statement. At the same time, everyone wanted to hear what Tianhu was going to say next. The problem was already in front of them. How to solve it was the most important thing. Yang Chendong also stared at Tianhu. He already had a solution in his heart. He just didn't know if the two of them thought of the same thing. Under everyone's expectant gaze, Tianhu opened his mouth. "Once we are surrounded by the enemy, it will be extremely difficult for us to eliminate them with the advantage of their military strength. If we fight with force, even if we can win, it will only be a lose-lose situation. Therefore, the only thing we can do is to break their arrangements. We can only rely on speed." When he heard the word speed, Yang Chendong's brows couldn't help but rise high. A satisfied expression appeared on his face. This result was exactly as he had expected. It seemed that Tianhu already had the demeanor of a general. Without looking at other people's reactions, Tianhu opened his mouth again. "In terms of military strength, we are inferior to the enemy. In terms of understanding the terrain, we are also inferior. Most of us are composed of foreign allied forces. We have just entered the southern Ming land, and there are many aspects that we need to adapt to. Just from this analysis, the situation is not good for us. But please don't forget that we still have 2 cavalry divisions, and one of them is the 1st Cavalry Division. This is our advantage, an advantage that the southern Ming army can't reach. As long as we fight with speed, we can disrupt the enemy's arrangements. As long as we don't let the enemy form an encirclement, we will have the opportunity to break them one by one. At that time, it will depend on whether everyone can grasp the opportunity." After finally expressing his opinion, Tian Hu returned to his original silent appearance, leaving the other division commanders there to discuss whether Tian Hu's plan was feasible. Yang Chendong saw everything in his eyes, but he didn't intend to interrupt. He just wanted to take the opportunity to see everyone's performance. After all, he wouldn't be able to stay with these division commanders in every battle. His ability to be independent was still being developed. After a short while, everyone stopped their discussion. Tu Hai, the commander of the 2nd Military Division, asked on behalf of the other commanders, "Commander Tian, we all know what you mean. But where do you plan to attack first by attacking the slow with speed?" Linchin. Tian Hu pointed to the north on the sand table and said, "This place is bordered by Yongji to the west and Siming residents to the west. As long as we can disrupt this place, it will be the same as cutting off the enemy's gathering. At that time, no matter which side we attack, the difficulty will be much lower." Division Commander Tu Hai nodded, indicating that he agreed with this decision. However, he still asked a question. Is it just relying on the 1st Cavalry Division? The intelligence has already said that there are more than 30,000 enemies in Linchin. You only have 10,000 people, and you will face the reinforcements of the Southern Ming Army at any time. Are you sure there won't be any problems? There isn't a target that the 1st Cavalry Division can't take down, Tian Hu said with a face full of pride. Then he looked at Lu Zhua. Of course, if Division Commander Lu's 1st Cavalry Division can cooperate with us and pretend to attack Yongji City, we can distract the enemy's attention. This will be a great help in reducing the pressure on our 1st Cavalry Division. No matter how arrogant the world's 1st Cavalry Division was, it was impossible for them to win against the Southern Ming Alliance's army of more than 300,000 people. No problem, the 1st Cavalry Division is willing to cooperate with Division Commander Tian, Lu Zhua said. From being the 1st Division Commander of the new division to the current Division Commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, he spent most of his time assisting in battles. Adding on the fact that he was cooperating with the 1st Cavalry Division, he didn't think that it was shameful to be assisting in battles. Many thanks. Seeing Lu Zhua agree so quickly, Tian Hu's face revealed a look of gratitude. Since the 2 cavalry divisions had expressed their opinions, the other 5 division commanders naturally didn't have any doubts. They immediately said in unison, "Then we have no problems. As long as Division Commander Tian can break the enemy's formation, we only need 3 days to take down Siming residents." The 7 division commanders made a battle plan. Yang Chendong nodded, indicating that he approved. Next, each side began to make various preparations. This time, Yang Chendong didn't have any intention of using the 7th Army. He wanted to test the strength of the Southern Ming Army. Whether or not they could take down Siming residents within 3 days became the goal of the test. If the facts proved that this army could be used, then he would give them more important missions in the future, and give them the opportunity to become stronger. On the other hand, if the facts proved that they couldn't, then he would think of a way to develop other armies. Chapter 1058. Unifying the world and making the Han Chinese the leader. This was something that many experts had never thought of before. Not only did Yang Chendong think of it, but he also wanted to make it a reality. Originally, he would have to face all sorts of problems, and some of the decisions he made would have to be made repeatedly. However, once the facts proved that he was right, he would definitely persevere. Just like the Foreign Alliance, the outcome of this battle would determine whether Yang Chendong would vigorously develop them in the future, or directly cancel them. After the decision was made, as the side that was going to attack the city, the 5 foreign races alliance continued to travel through the rainforest. They also used their rest time to cut down trees and make ladders. Although they had not completely left the rainforest and arrived at Lang Sun, the aura of war was already very strong. Another 10 days passed, and the 120,000 5-star army finally arrived at Lang Sun, meeting up with the 7th Army and the Vietnamese Army. The Heavenly Strategies Division and Hong Jin came up to Yang Chendong with a guilty look on their faces. After whispering to the 6th young master, they did not dare to raise their heads. "Raise your heads!" Looking at the 2 generals, Yang Chendong shouted angrily. Being shouted at, the 2 of them had no choice but to raise their heads, and they saw Yang Chendong's angry expression. When their eyes met, the latter said, "This battle was not your fault. The enemy had 300,000 people, and you only had 20,000. This was not a fair battle. You were able to escape unscathed, and even brought back 10,000 Han civilians. This is already a great achievement. What is there to be ashamed of? One couldn't be without pride. Otherwise he wouldn't be a qualified general." If Tian Su and Hong Jin couldn't recover, Yang Chendong would have no choice but to transfer them out of their current posts and take up civilian positions elsewhere. After all, if a general was not hot-blooded, how could he win a battle? Now the questioning was just his last effort. It would be best if he could scold them to wake them up, but if he couldn't, he could only give up. Luckily, Tian Su and Hong Jin were still very courageous. They felt guilty not because they couldn't defeat the Southern Ming alliance, but because they had suffered losses in this battle, especially the 7th Army. Zhao Shixue's 1st Regiment and 1st Battalion were completely annihilated. Not a single person escaped. As a teacher, Tian Su felt that he had a responsibility. Originally, he thought that the 6th young master would blame him, but unexpectedly, that was not the case at all. The two raised their heads and saluted together, saying, "6th young master, don't worry, we're already prepared. We're just waiting for the main force to arrive. Once the order is given, we'll join the counterattack. We want to avenge our comrades who died in the shelter. Revenge is a must, but we won't need you in the first battle. The 7th Army will stay by this young master's side. The Vietnamese army will continue to take care of the Han people, including the captives on the battlefield. Do you have any problems with that?" Comparatively speaking, as a local army, the strength of the Vietnamese army was considered the weakest. At most, they could be considered as a C-grade soldier. Even if there were many of them, their usefulness on the battlefield would be limited. Knowing that, it would be better to leave them at the rear and do some work within their capabilities. Since it was Yang Chendong's order, of course no one would object. The two generals thus agreed. After the two sides met up, they prepared to leave Lang Sun and attack the Little Nanming alliance. This time, Yang Chendong wanted to use reality to tell those who dared to spy on the 5-star army that they were not to be trifled with. They had already made their preparations. On the 3rd day after meeting up with the 7th Army and the Vietnamese army, the 1st Cavalry Division was the first to move out. They headed straight for Linchen in the northeast. Following that, the 5 outsiders also moved out. They had their eyes on Ximing Prefecture in the east. The last to move out was Luju's 1st Cavalry Division. They went to Yongji City in the west to cooperate with Division Commander Tian Hu. They finally moved. Nanning Prefecture, the central city of Guangxi. Guangdong King Zhu Huitu was currently presiding over the situation. Only half a day after the 5-star army moved out, a carrier pigeon brought the news. He said coldly, "Send people to investigate again." The scout left. Zhu Huitu started to read some information about the 5-star army. There were reports about the 1st Cavalry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division. However, because the outsiders had just been formed, they had only shown their might in Siam. There were not many records about them. Even so, the current information was enough for Zhu Huichun to analyze it properly. After an hour, Zhu Huitu shook his stiff neck and said, "The 1st Cavalry Division is not to be trifled with." This conclusion was not hard to come to. After all, this unit was too famous. Wherever they appeared, they would stir up trouble. Once Yang Chendong met with trouble, this unit would be mobilized and become the strongest killing weapon. When they took down the Phnom Penh dynasty, this unit was the main force. It only took them 31 days to take down a kingdom. This was almost unimaginable. However, they did it. With this, even Zhu Huitu did not dare to be careless. As the saying goes, pick the soft bone first. He did not want to meet such a strong opponent and dampen the morale of his soldiers. Just as he made the decision not to become enemies with the 1st Cavalry Division, a second carrier pigeon arrived. The details of the 5-star army moving out over 100,000 people were revealed. Guangxi was the territory of the Little Nanming King. Many places here were filled with their spies. It was undoubtedly difficult to avoid the spies. Yang Chendong did not intend to hide the movement of the army. He came openly and wanted to see how the little Nanming king would deal with it. Previously, Yao Yingjun, an intelligence agent in the little Nanming king group, had already sent news that Zhu Huitu was sinister and cunning. He was the kind of person who was not easy to deal with. However, Yang Qindong still did not put him in his eyes. He believed that with the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division, even if they could not defeat the opponent, if they wanted to retreat, no one would be able to stop them. Yang Qindong was too confident. He did not expect Zhu Huitu to not become enemies with the 1st Cavalry Division at all. Instead, he targeted the 1st Cavalry Division. It was better to break one finger than to injure all 10. Zhu Huitu wanted to make a name for himself through the battle with the 5-star army. Therefore, he was already prepared for a tough battle. With the advantage of military strength, he believed that as long as the plan was good, he would be able to achieve his goal. He had never thought of completely wiping out the 5-star army. He did not have that kind of strength. As long as he could repel the attack of the 5-star army, it would be enough for him to strengthen his reputation. The 1st Cavalry Division became the stepping stone for him to become famous. Immediately send troops to Yongji City. At the same time, inform Wu Yingtu to do his best to wipe out this cavalry division. As long as he can accomplish this task, it will be a great merit. Also, don't forget to tell him how many people he loses in this battle. When he returns, he can choose double the number of soldiers. Zhu Huitu's face flashed with a sinister gaze. As for the news that a large number of 5-star army soldiers were heading towards Ximing residence, he directly ignored it. They had only lost a small city. Compared to the cavalry division that could destroy a 5-star corps, it was easy for them to deal with such a heavy burden. The news was sent through carrier pigeons. Half a day later, it reached Wu Yingtu. At this moment, he was drinking with the general of the Bangladesh army, Rajiv. When he saw this order, he could not help but laugh. He could choose any soldiers he wanted, and the compensation was 2-to-1. This was a good deal. In the worst-case scenario, he could lose 10,000 Miao people in exchange for 20,000 elite Ming soldiers. Since it was like this, what was there to be afraid of? He drank the wine in his bowl in one gulp and looked at Rajiv. Of course, he said to the interpreter beside him, "Tell him that we should get to work." Afterwards, the large net targeting the 1st Cavalry Division began to unfold. Meanwhile, Lu Zhua, who was completely unaware of all of this, was leading the 1st Cavalry Division to wander around Yongji City. His mission was to attack the small Baiming reinforcements that came out from here, and do his best to ensure the safety of the 1st Cavalry Division's left wing. Lu Zhua, who never thought that anyone would make an enemy out of his cavalry, and did not know that he had already been targeted, only had Yongji City in front of him in his eyes. He was completely unaware that small southern Ming soldiers were continuously gathering around him and surrounding him. 1 day passed, 2 days passed, and on the 4th day he still did not see any reinforcements coming out from Yongji City. Even if Lu Zhua was a careless person, he still felt that something was not right. Logically speaking, Division Commander Tian, who should have already started attacking the surrounding areas. Due to the limitations of the cavalry, the level of the siege was average. However, sweeping through the villages and important roads around the city should not be a problem. Why did Yongji City not have any intention of sending reinforcements? Reporting, Division Commander. The scouts have reported that small southern Ming soldiers have been discovered behind us. Reporting, Division Commander. The scouts have reported that an unknown number of enemies have been discovered on our right. Reporting, our left. The reports entered Lu Zhua's ears one after another. At this moment, his expression was constantly changing. He finally understood why there had been no movement for 4 days in a row. It seemed that someone had set their sights on him. However, this was a cavalry division, and they were also cavalry warriors who had experienced hundreds of battles on the grasslands. Did they really think that they could take them down in one go? Immediately send a report to the 6th Young Master, and report the situation here. At this moment, Lu Zhua's eyes did not show any fear. On the contrary, there was a bit of excitement. For a long time, he had wanted to lead an army and fight the enemy alone to prove his ability. Chapter 1059. Now the opportunity had finally appeared. Order the 1st Regiment to be in the north, the 2nd Regiment to be in the east, the 3rd Regiment to be in the west, and the 4th Regiment to be in the back. Form an effective defense mechanism and wait for my orders. Get ready to attack, Liu Jue shouted excitedly. He couldn't wait to kill. To be honest, when he found out that the little Nanming army wanted to surround him, he was somewhat angry. They were clearly looking down on him. Since that was the case, he naturally wanted to show them how powerful he was, and let them know that the 1st Cavalry Division was not so easy to bully. At the same time, the telegram was sent to Yang Chendong in the Langshan Plains shelter. At this moment, it wasn't just the 1st Cavalry Division that sent the telegram. The 1st Cavalry Division and the Alien Alliance Army also sent the telegram. The 100,000 troops of the Alien Alliance Army had already begun to attack the Siming residents. Everything was going very smoothly. They didn't encounter any enemy reinforcements. With 100,000 people attacking a city with only 20,000 soldiers, there were no variables. The only thing they lacked now was time. However, the contents of the telegram from the 1st Cavalry Division were a bit strange. According to Tian Hu, when they arrived outside Linshan, the little Nanming army had already retreated into the city. Then they swept through the periphery. Other than some civilians who stayed here, they didn't encounter any other army. It felt like they had punched cotton. It was a bit uncomfortable. Tian Hu felt that something was wrong, so he sent a telegram to ask what to do next. After all, it was a pity that a sharp weapon release couldn't kill the enemy. Yang Chendong was also puzzled by this telegram. His intuition told him that something was wrong. The little Nanming army must be planning something, but he couldn't figure out what their goal was. It was also at this time that the telegram from the 1st Cavalry Division came. When they learned that there were enemies there, and their numbers were unknown, Yang Chendong suddenly sobered up and said, "Not good. The enemy is going to attack the 1st Cavalry Division. Young master, let's go rescue them." Beta Persei had long been itching for a fight. When he heard that there was finally a battle to fight, he volunteered. "I'm afraid it's too late." Yang Chendong didn't immediately agree. Instead, he came to the sand table and looked at the distance between them before shaking his head. There were only 1,000 black knights by his side. The rest were the main forces of the 7th Army. However, they did not have the help of war horses, so they could not move too fast. If they ran on foot, the 1st Cavalry Division would have suffered heavy losses before they could reach the battlefield. Beta Persei's heart sank when he heard Yang Chendong say that it was too late. He then asked, "Young master, should we send Division Commander Tian Hu to rescue them?" Yang Chendong wanted to say that since the other party was targeting the 1st Cavalry Division, it was impossible for them not to send someone to watch the 1st Cavalry Division. Sending him to rescue them would be dangerous. However, when he thought about how Linshan was not too far away, a rescue plan quickly formed in his mind. Yes, immediately send a telegram to Tian Hu and ask him to send the main forces to support the 1st Cavalry Division. Tell him that if someone tries to stop them, don't be afraid. Young master, I will immediately lead the troops to support them. Also, send a telegram to Division Commander Liu Jue, and tell him not to be rash. Concentrate the troops and wait for reinforcements. Yang Chendong said to Wang Shan, who was following beside him. He then called for Beta Persei to gather the Black Knights and the 7th Army to quickly gather. The telegram was quickly sent out. Tian Hu, who received the order, did not dare to delay. He immediately ordered the 2nd Regiment Commander Lu Duo, the 3rd Regiment Commander Hu Bo and the 4th Regiment Commander Bai Shuang to lead their troops to Yongji City. The 3 regiment commanders brought the 6,000 cavalry and turned their horses around, preparing to leave. At that moment, the gates of Linshan City opened, and the soldiers of the South Ming Army poured out. Needless to say, they could tell that the 1st Cavalry Division wanted to leave, so they charged out and wanted to stop them. Division Commander, what should we do? The 2nd Regiment Commander Lu Duo saw that the enemy had actually taken the initiative to leave the city. He was hesitant as to whether or not he should carry out his previous orders. Don't worry so much, just follow the orders. Tian Hu narrowed his eyes and looked at the South Ming army that had appeared, revealing traces of killing intent. From the reports, he knew that the enemy only had 20,000 soldiers. The 4,000 cavalry that he had left behind were enough to deal with them. Moreover, the sixth young master had already said that he would bring reinforcements. What was there to be afraid of? Knowing that their division commander had made up his mind, the 3 regiment commanders looked at each other and raised the horsewhips in their hands. They brought their cavalry and left the battlefield, heading towards Yongji City. Everyone listen to my orders. Check the bows and swords. Tian Hu licked his lips. Even though he only had 4,000 cavalry, he was still very confident. As long as the South Ming army dared to charge over, he wouldn't mind teaching them a lesson. Back to Luju's troops. The 4 regiments under him had already prepared to defend all 4 sides, and were even prepared to attack at any moment. Yang Chendong's telegram had arrived. After reading the contents, although he was still a bit angry and thought that the 6th young master didn't believe in the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division, he couldn't go against military orders. He still ordered the entire army to defend and not attack. Reality quickly told him that listening to Yang Chendong's orders was the right thing to do. This was because Lujua quickly realized that there were more and more enemies surrounding him. Among them, there were also cavalrymen and Miao soldiers with Miao swords in their hands. When the scouts continuously retreated and information entered his ears, Lujua's expression finally changed. The number of enemies surrounding him had reached 100,000 infantry and 15,000 cavalry. This number greatly exceeded his expectations. He could imagine what would have happened if he had taken the initiative to attack. Perhaps the entire 1st Cavalry Division would have been annihilated here. Taking a deep breath, Lujua calmed himself down. He shouted to the cavalry soldiers beside him, "Everyone, don't panic. The 6th young master already knows about the situation here. The 1st Cavalry Division is rushing over to provide reinforcements. As long as we can hold on for a while, we will be able to wait for reinforcements to arrive." When the name of the 6th young master was mentioned, it greatly boosted the morale of the entire division. In the eyes of the soldiers, Yang Chendong had already become an omnipotent existence. Since he already knew about the situation here, as long as they could hold on, they would definitely be able to find a chance to survive. Taking out their bows and arrows, and hanging their swords by the side of their horses, the 8,400 cavalry soldiers looked at the enemies coming from all directions with bright eyes. Everyone's eyes revealed the determination to fight to the end. Wu Yingtu and Rajiv, who surrounded them, had a slightly regretful expression on their faces. They were somewhat disappointed that the enemy did not take the initiative to attack. But what could they do? With their military strength that was more than 10 times that of the enemy, they were still confident that they could destroy the enemy. Fearing that undue delay would lead to more trouble, Wu Yingtu and Rajiv, who did not want to wait any longer, gave out orders at the same time. The army of more than 100,000 slowly advanced, constantly shrinking the encirclement. It seemed like they wanted to surround the 1st Cavalry Division and annihilate them here. In the face of absolute strength, any promises and tricks were futile. Neither side came up with such a plan. An hour later, when the distance between the 2 sides was less than 1 li, battle cries sounded from all directions. The infantry of the Southern Ming Army took the initiative to attack. Take turns to fire arrows. Try to preserve your strength and kill as many enemies as possible. Lujua displayed the characteristics of an excellent general. In the face of a grim situation, not only was he not afraid, he was also very calm. Under his orders, wave after wave of arrows were shot out, landing in the midst of the charging enemy camp. Cries of pain and agony continuously sounded out. Less than 1 li away, the cavalry forcefully fired 5 waves of arrows. After killing about 1,000 enemies, the cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division began to move. Their warhorses galloped and collided with the charging soldiers of the Southern Ming Army. The smell of blood filled the air, giving off an unpleasant smell. This was destined to be a battle that could not be won. There were people everywhere, and under the impenetrable blockade, the cavalry's range of movement was constantly shrinking. Unable to use their strengths, the cavalry's advantage was greatly reduced, and the 1st Cavalry Division began to suffer casualties. Fortunately, the morale of the soldiers of the Southern Ming Army wasn't that high. When they charged forward with their advantage in numbers, and thought that they could drown the 1st Cavalry Division, they were met with a strong counterattack. Especially when the soldiers at the front were either killed by arrows or chopped into two by sharp sabers. When this terrifying scene appeared, the soldiers of the Southern Ming army retreated, and their morale began to waver. Using this chance, the 1st Cavalry Division took a breather and once again shot out arrows, increasing their victory. Under Linchin City, 50,000 Southern Ming army soldiers charged out from all directions. Contrary to his expectations, there were only 20,000 enemies. Unknowingly, 30,000 more had appeared. 4,000 against 50,000, a difference of more than 10 times, causing the pressure on the 1st Cavalry Division to increase. However, facing all of this, Division Commander Tian who was not moved. In his eyes, enemies were meant to be killed. There was no difference between 1 enemy and 10 enemies. The war horses galloped and did not retreat. Tian who was the tip of the arrow, leading dozens of cavalry to charge at the Southern Ming army. At the same time, there were hundreds of other arrow formations. As the two sides clashed, corpses were strewn all over. This was the first time that the Southern Ming army had seen the arrow formations. The moment they came into contact with them, they were stunned. When the formations broke through the momentum of the Southern Ming army's charge and disrupted their formation, the enemy had no choice but to switch from offense to defense. Even so, they still suffered heavy casualties. If it weren't for the fact that they had the advantage in numbers, they might have already collapsed. Cavalry still had a lot of advantages over infantry. For example, in terms of speed, strength, and mobility. In addition, every soldier of the 1st Cavalry Division had been carefully selected. They were all experienced veterans who had gone through countless bloody battles. When they cooperated with each other and attacked with unparalleled speed and decisiveness, even more enemy corpses were left on the battlefield. Chapter 1060. In front of Yongji City, the bloody battle continued. After losing the first battle, 15,000 Bengali cavalry joined in and greatly suppressed the 1st Cavalry Division's counterattack. Both sides were cavalry, and even though the 1st Cavalry Division's fighting strength was stronger, they still showed signs of fatigue in the face of more and more energetic enemy cavalry. The 1st Cavalry Division's casualties began to increase. At the start, there were only a few dozen casualties, but now there were hundreds. This number was still increasing. After 8 hours of bloody battle, the sky had completely darkened. Thanks to the weather, the Southern Ming army stopped attacking and only surrounded them. Using this opportunity, Lu Zhuo ordered the soldiers to rest and reorganize. Then, countless soldiers jumped down from their horses with tired faces. It was also at this time that Lu Zhuo, as the division commander, noticed that around 2,000 soldiers had died in battle, and 500 were seriously injured. The other soldiers were also injured. After knowing that more than a quarter of the soldiers had died, Lu Zhuo's face became terrifyingly gloomy. He called over the telegraphist beside him and told him to report this situation to the 6th young master. At the same time, he added that he and the 1st Cavalry Division were prepared to fight to the last man. When Yang Qindong received this news, he was on the way to Linchin City with the Black Cavalry and the 7th Army. After reading the telegram, he put it aside. At this moment, he didn't know what to say. All he could do was silently rush. At the same time, he had a clearer understanding of King Guangtong. He also admitted that compared to other great Ming generals, this person knew more about the art of war. He admitted that he had underestimated this King Guangtong. Yang Qindong also hoped that the reinforcements sent by Tian who would arrive quickly and help the 1st Cavalry Division. In reality, Lu Duo and the other division commanders didn't delay along the way. After receiving the order, they rushed over from Linchin City. Even when they ate on their horses. During this time, they met many enemy soldiers who tried to stop them, but they were all defeated by their unstoppable momentum. When the sky was about to brighten, they were finally less than 50 li away from Yongji City. When the sky slowly brightened, the Bengali cavalry once again attacked. Not only that, but there were also 10,000 Miao soldiers working together with them. The Miao soldiers were able to survive until now because of their hard work. Facing the encirclement of the Ming army at all times, their fighting strength gradually increased. Compared to normal Ming soldiers, their performance on the battlefield was better and more ferocious. 10,000 Miao soldiers and 10,000 Bengali cavalry surged forward, showing that the southern Ming army was ready for the final battle. Facing this, Lu Zhuo didn't have any intention of backing down. He personally led the cavalry forward. Although they didn't have the advantage in numbers, and their stamina wasn't as good as when they were at their peak after fighting for half a day, they had the confidence to survive. They had to persevere until the last moment when they couldn't hold on anymore. The battle continued, and lives could be lost at any time. The 1st Cavalry Division had more and more injured people, and the number of brothers who died also gradually increased. The team of 6,000 became 5,000, then 4,000. More than half of them had died, but there were still no reinforcements. Lu Zhuo didn't know how many enemies he had killed. His body was covered in blood. Some of it was his, but most of it was the enemy's. Another half an hour passed, and the number of casualties around him had exceeded 1,000. He knew that if this continued, the remaining 3,000 people would all be sacrificed here in less than an hour. Could it be that there was really no hope? Just as this thought appeared in Lu Zhuo's mind, a commotion came from the encirclement behind him. Then, a loud and familiar bugle sounded. This was the unique bugle call of the 5-star army when they were charging. When Lu Zhuo first heard it, he felt that this sound was so beautiful and pleasant to the ears. His entire body felt so comfortable. When he turned around, he saw the infantrymen of the Little South Ming army retreating to the sides like a tide. In the middle, a large number of cavalrymen were rushing in. It's the comrades of the 1st Cavalry Division. Our reinforcements are here. Retreat and quickly report back to the other side. Finally seeing hope, Lu Zhuo didn't know where he got the strength from. As he shouted loudly, his arms seemed to be filled with strength, allowing him to once again swing his sword to block the attack of the enemy cavalry in front of him. It was Lu Duo and the other 3 regiments of the 1st Cavalry Division's cavalry. They had rushed all the way here, and finally arrived at the last moment. Then, like a ferocious tiger, they charged towards the encirclement of the southern Ming army. Under their valiance, no one was their match. Any soldier who had the courage to stand in front of Lu Duo, and the others would quickly become a corpse lying on the cold ground. When more and more soldiers were killed on the ground, no one dared to take the brunt of the attack. A large path was opened, and the 1st Cavalry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division finally met up. Commander Lu, leave this to us. You take the brothers and retreat. The moment Lu Duo arrived, he took over the front line of defense of the 1st Cavalry Division. He led the 2nd Regiment to block the attack. The 3rd Regiment Commander Hu Bo was in the middle, and the 4th Regiment Commander Bai Shuang was at the back. They protected Lu Zhuo and the 3,000 injured cavalry as they retreated. The moment Lu Duo arrived, he quickly taught the opposing Bengali cavalry how to behave. As for the Miao soldiers who were wielding Miao blades, the brothers of the 1st Cavalry Division were either wielding a blade in one hand and a shield in the other, or wielding a blade in both hands. Only then did they understand why the enemy was called the 1st Cavalry Division, and how wrong it was to think that the 1st Cavalry Division was already very powerful. If you compare yourself to others, you'll die. If you compare goods, you'll throw them away. When Lu Duo's 2nd Regiment appeared, although there were only 2,000 people, they gave off the feeling that they were an army with thousands of men and horses. The first to suffer heavy losses were the Bengali cavalry. Because they were cavalry, they were used to being high and mighty. Normally, they would look down on the infantrymen. In their eyes, they were the strongest. However, just a day ago, 1st Cavalry Division taught them what to do. Let them know what kind of disastrous price they would pay if they underestimated their opponent. They taught them that even though they were both cavalry, the difference in strength was like heaven and earth. They originally thought that the cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division was already very strong. After all, to be able to hold on for so long under the attack of so many infantrymen, and twice the number of cavalry was already very difficult. Seeing that the 1st Cavalry Division was about to be finished, their morale was about to collapse. If that was the case, they would only need one more charge to completely wipe out the enemy. However, another cavalry appeared, and the enemy's 2,000 cavalry dared to charge head-on. Looking at the close to 10,000 Miao soldiers and the countless southern Ming soldiers around them, the Bengali cavalry laughed. They laughed. There were still people in this world who didn't know death. Did they really think that they were made of iron? A mere 2,000 people dared to attack an army of tens of thousands. Of course they couldn't be spoiled. They immediately pulled out their horses and charged forward, holding their swords. They wanted to teach these new 5-star army cavalry how to write the word death. Then they indeed knew what the word death was. Unfortunately, they were the ones who died and not their opponents. Lu Duo and the others either had a sword and a shield, or 2 swords. They could both attack and defend. When they defended, they could defend themselves tightly. When they attacked, they could attack openly. Regardless of whether it was the speed, strength, or tricky angles of the swords, it was impossible for the enemy to catch up. Many cavalrymen were even knocked off their horses before they could see their opponents clearly. Under such a concentrated attack, once a cavalryman fell off his horse, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even if you weren't seriously injured, as long as you fell off your horse, there would be countless feet stepping on you. Even if you wanted to, you wouldn't be able to survive. With such great strength and speed, most of the Bengali cavalrymen were knocked off their horses in an instant. When this scene continued, the Bengali cavalrymen learned to be smart. They reined in their horses and intentionally retreated, leaving the battlefield to the other infantrymen. The second to be attacked were the Miao soldiers. They were at the front of the charge, and because of that, when the Bengali cavalrymen retreated, they became the vanguard of the charge. Fortunately, Lu Duo's 2nd Regiment started to slow down, as if to give them a chance to catch their breath. Then the 3rd Regiment came. Under the lead of their regiment commander Hu Bo, they launched a new charge, and the force of the charge slammed into the Miao soldiers. Blood splattered everywhere as blades flashed. Many of the Miao soldiers were sent flying by the force of the charge, while others were slashed in the head by the blades. In just a single exchange, hundreds of people had fallen. However, the charge was still ongoing, and there were still some cavalrymen from the 3rd Regiment that had not reached the front. Seeing the enemy's strength increasing, the Bengali cavalrymen retreating, and the surrounding Nanming soldiers retreating, the Miao soldiers could not take it anymore. Why should they be the ones to face the danger? They immediately began to retreat. This caused the Nanming soldiers, who seemed to have the upper hand, to be forced into a passive retreat. Don't charge anymore, everyone retreat, retreat. The 3rd Regiment Hu Bo had only killed 2 enemies, and the area in front of him was empty. He looked enviously at Lu Duo's 2nd Regiment, who was resting by the side. Lu Duo's 2nd Regiment was truly enjoying themselves. Regardless of whether his killing intent was satisfied or not, Hu Bo did not forget the main purpose of this mission. Since they had already met up with the 1st Cavalry Division, the next thing to do was to rescue them. This was not only the orders of their regiment commander, Tian Hu, but also the orders of the 6th Young Master. Chapter 1061. The 6th Young Master's orders were not to be disobeyed. Bai Shuang led the 4 regiments and retreated, with the 3,000 wounded soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division in the middle. Then Lu Duo's 2nd Regiment and Hu Bo's 3rd Regiment brought up the rear. The group successfully charged out of the encirclement and moved towards Liangshan shelter. Wu Yingtu and Ravji were only left with their backs. The world's 1st Cavalry Division continued to display their absolute strength and completed the mission of rescuing the 1st Cavalry Division. The remaining 2 regiments were led by Division Commander Tian, who engaged in a life-and-death battle with the 50,000 southern Ming soldiers. 4,000 against 50,000, they naturally had a disadvantage in terms of numbers. But so what? This did not affect Tian Hu and the others in the slightest. Under his leadership, the formation at the tip of the arrow advanced, retreated, and advanced again as if it had entered a no-man's land. It went in and out 7 times. It was as valiant as Zhao Zilong on the yellow board slope. Teacher Tian, whose dual blades could be said to be used exquisitely by him. Wherever he appeared, a long hole would be cut open. No one could come out from his left or right, and no one was his match. Anyone who dared to block in front of him would either die or be injured. Tian, who led the 4,000 men of the 1st and 5th regiments to block the attacks of the 50,000 southern Ming soldiers. He demonstrated that the 1st Cavalry Division's reputation was earned through slashing and slashing. It was said that the strong were afraid of the unreasonable were afraid of the reckless, and the reckless were afraid of those who didn't care about their lives. Seeing that the 4,000 cavalrymen didn't care about their lives and continued to charge forward, the 50,000 soldiers of the Southern Ming army were terrified. After leaving behind close to 5,000 corpses, they slowly retreated. Even when the sky was completely dark, they didn't dare to take a step forward. In the end, we don't have enough troops. Looking at Linchin City that was just inches away, Tian Hu sighed. He only had 2 regiments and 4,000 men. It was extremely difficult to break through the layers of obstacles and enter the city. With a sigh, he could only wait. He would wait until dawn to find another way. Compared to Tian Hu, the southern Ming soldiers were even more depressed. They had the advantage in numbers, and they were the ones on the attack. But why was it the other way around when it came to the battlefield? Instead, they had become the ones being beaten. If it wasn't for the fact that they had too many soldiers, and the number of 5-star army's cavalry was too small, perhaps a single attack would have destroyed their fighting spirit and caused them to be completely defeated. A few young southern Ming generals gathered together and offered suggestions. However, even after daybreak, they still couldn't find a better solution. At this time, the scouts at the front reported that the 5-star army's reinforcements had appeared. They did not know how many soldiers there were, but there were both cavalry and infantry. They could not think of a better idea, and now that they heard that reinforcements were coming, the few generals immediately came to an agreement to retreat back to Linchin City. They would then report this matter to King Guangtong and listen to his orders for what to do next. The southern Ming army suddenly retreated back to the city at dawn, following which, Yang Qindong, Shifeng, 1,000 black cavalry and the 7th Army rushed over and met up with Tian Hu. "Are you okay?" "6th young master, we are fine. In the battle yesterday afternoon, we killed close to 5,000 men. 3 brothers died and 78 were injured." As soon as he saw Yang Qindong, Tian Hu immediately became a lot more spirited. Especially when he saw that Lu Qi, who came with him, was wearing a black weapon, he began to chuckle. Not bad. Listening to the battlefield report, Yang Qindong nodded in satisfaction. The world's #1 cavalry division was indeed the #1 division. Even with 4,000 against 50,000, they were able to make the enemy not dare to move recklessly. Just based on this momentum alone, they were invincible. Of course, Yang Qindong also saw the light in Tian Hu's eyes. He smiled and patted his shoulder. "Give the 7th Army an hour to rest and then prepare to attack." Okay. Hearing that the 6th young master was going to attack Linchin City, Tian Hu laughed out loud. With the 7th Army leading the way, it was time for the cavalry division to show off their heroism. An hour passed in the blink of an eye, following which, the various troops started to prepare for the attack. The 2 100mm mortars that came with the army were pushed to the front lines. They were adjusting the markers and aiming at the south gate of Linchin City. However, the plan didn't change quickly. Suddenly, the city gate opened and a small group of southern Ming troops appeared. "6th young master, we're ready. Should we fire now?" It was as if he didn't see the troops coming over. The 7th Army's commander, Tian Su, held his breath and asked. "Wait a moment." Yang Qindong looked at the diplomatic group with a face full of curiosity. What was going on? They hadn't even started fighting yet, and the other side was already backing down? Did they want to negotiate? The others were also shaken by the scene in front of them. What kind of situation was this? An army was pressing down on the border. Shouldn't it be the army that was sent? Why was it a diplomatic group? What was the enemy doing? Those who didn't understand turned their attention to Yang Qindong. They were used to listening to the 6th young master's orders. Especially when they didn't understand something, they had to listen to the 6th young master. This was because countless facts had proven that this person wouldn't make a wrong decision. However, this time, Yang Qindong was indeed confused by the situation in front of him. However, he didn't show any surprise or hesitation on the surface. Instead, he seemed to be sizing up the troops coming out of the city. In reality, he was observing and trying to figure out the other party's intentions. Without any orders, the cannons didn't fire, and the troops smoothly arrived at the front lines. When the two sides were less than 300 meters apart, they stopped. Then, a middle-aged man wearing a long robe walked out of the diplomatic group. The moment he appeared, Beta Persei's eyes widened. "Young master, we seem to have seen this person before." Nonsense, of course they had seen him before. The person who came was Chen Tian, the most eloquent person in the Little South Ming Dynasty. Yang Chendong had met him once before. That was when they were dealing with the heavenly residence stockades Miao Jinlong, and he played the role of a lobbyist. However, he didn't expect to appear again. Could it be that they were really here for peace talks? Yang Chendong couldn't understand. The current situation was clearly in the Little South Ming Dynasty's favor. Moreover, the fate of the surrounded 1st Cavalry Division was still unknown. Even if they wanted peace talks, he should be the one to suggest it. The other party had actually appeared. What was the meaning of this? Chen Tian didn't let Yang Chendong wait for long. Soon, he led a group of people to Yang Chendong, who was in the middle of the battle formation. Then he cupped his fists and bowed. In a very familiar manner he said, "Bugnam of Gojoseon, it's been a few years since we last met in Gaozhou. You're still as elegant as ever." Unable to understand what the other party was thinking, Yang Chendong maintained a polite smile. "Mr. Chen, you've come from afar. It must be a pleasure to meet you. Come please." He didn't show any doubt, as if he knew that Yang Chendong would come. Chen Tian's evaluation of Yang Chendong increased a little. He didn't show his emotions on his face. Under Yang Chendong's invitation, Chen Tian came to the main tent. Both parties sat down in the guest and host seats. Then Beta Persei served the dishes and stood behind Yang Chendong. He glared fiercely at Chen Tian, as if he would draw his sword and kill him if Chen Tian dared to make any rash moves. Usually, people who were eloquent and good at talking were not timid. Otherwise, if they were so scared that they couldn't speak when they saw their opponent, it would be a big mistake. For this reason, no matter how Beta Persei looked at him, Chen Tian remained calm and composed. He slowly tasted his tea and didn't forget to nod gently, as if he was praising the taste of the tea. Yang Chendong also slowly tasted his tea. He was not in a hurry to ask the other party's purpose for coming. He believed that since Chen Tian had come, he would definitely have something to say. Yang Chendong just waited silently. Sure enough, after a quarter of an hour, Chen Tian, who had drunk 2 cups of tea in a row, put down his teacup and looked at Yang Chendong. He seemed to be interested and asked, "Bugnam of Gojoseon, what do you think of the current situation?" Was he showing off or testing him? Yang Chendong knew that King Guangtong's sudden choice to target the 1st Cavalry Division was indeed beyond everyone's expectations. It also broke the pre-war plan he had set before the war, so he had no choice but to take action personally. "What, after taking a small advantage, you want to show off in front of me?" Although he felt a bit ashamed, Yang Chendong said without changing his expression, "Very good. Don't you see that the 5-star army has already surrounded Linchin City? If this king wants to, we should be able to break through the city quickly and kill our way to Nanning Prefecture. Alright, I heard that Zhu Huihua is there. Haha, just right, I can find him to drink some tea. It's a beautiful thing for 2 kings to meet." It seemed like he was talking about an extremely ordinary matter, but when Chen Tian heard these words, his expression couldn't help but turn ugly. First, the current situation was between Linchin City and Little Southern Ming Army. Whether it was in terms of territory or military strength, the 5-star army was at a disadvantage. It wasn't like what he said about breaking through the city. Second, regarding Yang Chendong's identity as Bugnam of Gojoseon, it was only a reward from the imperial court. Until now, neither Little Southern Ming Army nor Little Southern Ming Army had publicly acknowledged it. Thus, the so-called meeting between 2 kings was naturally impossible. Chen Tian chuckled as he thought about how thick-skinned and black-hearted Yang Chendong was. He didn't refute Yang Chendong directly, because he wanted to wait for Yang Chendong to ask him why he was laughing. Then he would remind Yang Chendong that this would play an important role in the upcoming negotiations. However, some things didn't necessarily develop according to plan. Just like now, there was an extra person outside the door. It was the telegrapher, Wang Shan. When he sent the 2 telegrams to Beta Persei and arrived in Yang Chendong's hands, he only took a cursory glance and raised his eyebrows. After a moment of silence, he whispered something in Beta Persei's ear. Then Beta Persei nodded and left. Only Yang Chendong and Chen Tian were left in the main tent. At this moment, Yang Chendong didn't speak, nor did he ask him what he was laughing about. Chapter 1062. Chen Tian did not go according to plan. He was still thinking of how to change the topic so that Yang Chendong could see the situation clearly and listen to his analysis of the pros and cons. Only then would he be able to come up with a suggestion. Just as he was thinking of how to say it without losing his status and making Yang Chendong grateful, the sound of cannons suddenly rang out outside the tent. It shocked Chen Tian, who was not prepared at all, so much so that he threw the teacup in his hand to the ground. Chen Tian was indeed a courageous person to dare to appear in the 5-star Army's camp at this moment. However, this did not prove that he was not afraid of death. Especially when the cannons suddenly rang out, it was completely out of his expectations. This kind of shock made him reveal his cowardly nature. Yang Chendong saw Chen Tian's actions, but did not make any comments because he knew that this was just the beginning. After throwing the teacup in a panic, Chen Tian knew that he had lost his composure and made a fool of himself. However, he did not care so much at this moment. Instead, he sat up straight and anxiously asked, "Bugnam of Gojoseon, what's with the cannons?" "Oh, nothing's wrong. They are only bombarding Linchin City." "Right. Didn't this king just say that we have already surrounded the city? We've already surrounded this place. Attacking the city is just a matter of time." Yang Chendong had a smile on his face, as if he was talking about a trivial matter. But in Chen Tian's eyes, that was not the case at all. He was already here as a negotiator, so why did the 5-star Army still want to attack? What position did they want to place him in? Also, Linchin City was one of the bargaining chips in the upcoming negotiations. If it was attacked now, wouldn't that mean that there was one less condition? As a negotiator, he definitely could not let such a thing happen. "Bugnam of Gojoseon, as a negotiator of the Southern Ming Empire, I request you to immediately stop attacking Linchin City." "Southern Ming Empire? I'm afraid you can't represent it. At most, you can only represent your master, Little Southern Ming." Yang Chendong chuckled. His tone was filled with disdain. "No. I can represent Bugnam of Gojoseon, and tell him the truth. My master has already sided with Nanming, and is now a member of Nanming. Bugnam of Gojoseon is now bombarding Linchin City. Does he want to fall out with Nanming and rebel?" Yang Chendong was taken aback by Chen Tian's words. There was too much information, so much so that Yang Chendong had to consider it carefully. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he digested the information first before looking at Chen Tian. Yang Chendong asked, "Who is your master referring to?" "Of course it's King Guangtong." "Humph, Zhu Huilu is not satisfied with the title of Minzhuang Prince. He even calls himself Little Nanming Prince. This is treacherous. How can I associate with such a person?" Chen Tian's face was filled with righteousness and disdain. If Chen Tian hadn't spoken to him on behalf of Zhu Huilu, Yang Chendong would have believed him. It seemed that Chen Tian had given up on Zhu Huilu and sided with Zhu Huilu. In that case, the latter was Zhu Qizhen of Ying sect who had sided with Nanming. This was the first time he heard of this news and he was shocked. Zhu Huilio's rise had increased the internal friction of Nanming. They had no time to care about other things. Yang Chendong could then stir up trouble in the south, expand his territory, and increase his strength. In fact, Zhu Huilu didn't disappoint him. He called himself Little Nanming Prince and attracted the hatred of Nanming. Even after being attacked by Nanming and King Shiping from both sides, he still persisted. Now he had joined forces with the Bengal army and defeated King Shiping. He showed that he wanted to compete with Nanming as an equal. If he hadn't provoked Yang Chendong this time, he might have been able to achieve a certain level of success. Seeing that the situation was good, why did King Guangtong suddenly side with Nanming? Did that mean that he had fallen out with Little Nanming Prince and his brother Zhu Huilu? That's right, It was recorded in history that the two brothers didn't get along in the end and parted ways. But in this case, Zhu Qizhenaving's sect really had the strength to rule the entire Nanming. In addition to strengthening himself, he would naturally pose a certain threat to the five-star army. In a very short time, Yang Chendong thought of a lot. While analyzing the pros and cons, he also thought about what he should do to gain the most benefits. So much so that he didn't hear Chen Tian calling him several times. Bugnam of Gojoseon, Bugnam of Gojoseon. The hurried greeting finally broke Yang Chendong's contemplation. He raised his head and looked at Chen Tian. Chen Tian said anxiously, Bugnam of Gojoseon, now I'm here to negotiate with you on behalf of Nanming. Shouldn't you stop firing the cannons first to show your sincerity? Sincerity? Hearing this, Yang Chendong laughed, then suddenly changed his expression and said, You still have the nerve to talk about sincerity with me? Previously, you sent troops to my Liangshan shelter for no reason, took away more than 40,000 people, and killed thousands of my soldiers. When I brought people to have a good talk with you, you directly surrounded my 1st Cavalry Division, causing them to be heavily injured and almost completely wiped out. Is this your sincerity? The situation of the 1st Cavalry Division that Yang Chendong mentioned was one of the 2 telegrams that he had just received from Wang Shan. It clearly recorded the fact that Luju's 1st Cavalry Division was only left with 3,000 people, and almost everyone was injured. It could be imagined that if it wasn't for Lu Duo and the other 2 commanders arriving in time, it was not impossible for them to be completely wiped out. How could he not take revenge for such a huge grudge? The 2nd telegram said that the 100,000 foreign invaders had already taken down the Xisha residence and had either killed or captured the 20,000 Nanming soldiers there. It also said that they were rushing towards Linshan City and would listen to his orders. After receiving this news, Yang Chendong had the confidence to take revenge. With the 100,000 foreign invaders, he was confident that he could fight a few rounds with King Guangtong and determine the victor. How was it possible for him to stop at this moment? Yang Chendong suddenly became angry and scolded him for not being sincere. Chen Tian found that he had nothing to say. He who could be unreasonable and sly, didn't know what to say at this moment. Without waiting for Chen Tian to think about what to say, Yang Chendong said, You said that you are the envoy of the Nanming Empire. Do you think I will believe you? Who doesn't know that you were the advisor of the rebel little Nanming King Zhu Huixin? What? Now that you know the power of our 5-star army, you want to talk? Let me tell you it's too late. Men, bring Mr. Chen away to rest, don't disturb him. Yes. Qiu Vi, Ba Daojiang, Peng Yu and the others who were waiting outside entered the tent. They didn't give Chen Tian any chance to speak, and directly brought him away. The tent quickly quieted down. Beta Persei strode to Yang Chendong's side and lowered his voice as much as possible. Young master, if Zhu Huixin really defected to the Nanming Empire, what should we do? Are we not going to take revenge for the 1st Cavalry Division? Who said we're not going to take revenge? Yang Chendong looked up at Beta Persei and asked. But if we take action against Zhu Huixin now, isn't that the same as declaring war against the Nanming Empire? Young master, have you made preparations? Beta Persei was confused. What preparations? Who said that Zhu Huixin defected to the Nanming Empire? Do you have any concrete evidence? Yang Chendong asked. In that case this matter is fake and Chen Tian is spouting nonsense. Beta Persei seemed to have realized something and answered. It doesn't look like it. Unexpectedly, Yang Chendong shook his head at this moment. Although a person like Chen Tian was extremely eloquent, he wouldn't dare to make such a big lie. After all, this matter was of great importance, and the consequences were not something he could bear. Therefore, it was very likely that this matter was true, but it hadn't been announced yet. Since it hadn't been announced, this was Yang Chendong's opportunity. As if thinking of something, Yang Chendong called Beta Persei and whispered, Send a telegram to Yang San and Yang Lu to confirm the authenticity of this matter. Also, inform Yao Ingjun to immediately spread the news that Zhu Huixin has defected to the Nanming Empire. What Yang Chendong wanted was to make use of the time difference, and the fact that the telegram could be spread without any hindrance. He wanted Zhu Huixin to be prepared and guard against his brother, so that he wouldn't be harmed. As long as this person didn't die, little Nanming's power wouldn't be disintegrated, and could still play a role in restraining Nanming. He could use this time to solve more problems in Southeast Asia. Beta Persei nodded, and went to arrange for Wang Shan to send the report. Yang Chendong didn't stay in the tent. Instead, he went out of the tent and came to the side of the cannons. He shouted, "Boom! Aim at the city gate and blast it with all your might. Division Commander Tian Hu, Division Commander Tian Su, get ready to attack the city. This time, we must take down Linchin City." Before, Yang Chendong only wanted to pressure the other party and tell them that he wasn't someone to be trifled with. Now he really wanted to take down Linchin City. On one hand, he wanted to take revenge for the 1st Cavalry Division. On the other hand, he wanted to make use of the time difference to gain more benefits. After the 6th young master gave the order, the cannoneers didn't hold back and fired one after another. Very quickly, Linchin City's walls were filled with holes and the thick city gate was completely destroyed. Using this opportunity, Division Commander Tian Hu, who had been waiting by the side, unsheathed his blades and led 2 regiments of the 1st Cavalry Division into the city. Behind them were thousands of soldiers from the 7th Army. When Chen Tian walked out of Linchin City, he promised his subordinates that he would definitely make the 5-star army stop attacking the city, so that they wouldn't have to worry. Because of this, the soldiers guarding the city let down their guard. Even when the cannons sounded, although some people were shocked, some people still said that it was just the 5-star army trying to scare people, and that there was no need to be afraid. Chapter 1063. But now, even the city gates had been blasted open by the cannons, and the cavalry had entered the city. Finally, the soldiers were afraid. The resistance they formed in their panic was not Tian Hu's match at all, and they could not stop the powerful cavalry from killing their way in. In addition, the Lu 7th Division followed closely behind and fired bullets as if they were free. Very quickly, a path of blood was carved out and the morale of the South Ming army was crushed. It seemed that Zhu Huihua had led 300,000 troops and defeated Shiping Wangmubin. He had taken in tens of thousands of soldiers, and had the advantage in numbers. However, having a large number of soldiers did not mean that they were elite soldiers. Most of these soldiers were made up of peasants, and they had not even undergone proper military training. It was still possible to rely on them to fight a smooth battle, but if they were to fight a fierce battle, they would not be a match at all. Once the fighting spirit was in chaos, it would be like monkeys scattering when the tree falls, and all of them would run away. When they entered the city, they met with some effective resistance. However, under the fierce attacks of Tian Hu and the 2 cavalry regiments, they were quickly destroyed. Following this, they did not meet any decent resistance. The tens of thousands of soldiers fled if they could and surrendered if they could not. In just half a day, Linchin City had been taken over by the 5-star army. After taking down Linchin City, they had opened the door to the Nanning Prefecture. As long as the 5-star army continued to attack, they would be able to fight Guangtong Wang Zhu Huihua in close combat. However, Yang Chendong did not choose to do so. He had limited troops and what he needed to do now was wait. Wait for Lu Duo's 3 cavalry regiments and the 1st Cavalry Division to return. Wait for the 100,000 foreign races to gather. If everything was prepared and there was still time, he would not mind teaching Zhu Huihua a lesson, and let him know that there were some people that he could not offend. Yao Yingjun walked on the streets of the Guizhou Sea residence. As usual, he would go to the tea house to listen to music and drink tea. His life was very carefree. However, today, after he came out of the tea house, he had a look of anxiousness on his face. Speaking of which, there was only one matter. He had just received news from his intelligence team that Zhu Huichen, the Prince of Guangdong, had defected to the Southern Ming Imperial Court. News by telegram was always the fastest. Yao Yingjun was sure that no one in the Guizhou division knew about this. At the very least, Zhu Huihua, the self-proclaimed Prince of Little Nanming, did not know. Otherwise, the streets would not be so quiet. Yao Yingjun was sure that he was not the only one who knew about this matter. However, the main character, Zhu Huihua, should not know about it. Could it be that, when he thought about the possibility that the patrolling soldiers on the streets were related to Prince Guangdong, Zhu Huihua. Perhaps he had already bribed the people around Prince Lil, Nanming, and was prepared for this. Was there going to be a mutiny? When he thought of the mutiny, the first thing that came to Yao Yingjuan's mind was Zhu Lian's pitiful appearance. Zhu Lian, the younger sister of Zhu Huilu and Zhu Huilu, was titled Eternal Victory Princess. In the beginning, Yao Yingjun was able to infiltrate their inner circle by relying on Zhu Lian's love for him. He used this relationship to complete the mission of understanding and investigating the higher-ups of Prince Guangtong and the others. Initially, he thought that the mission wouldn't last too long. However, he didn't expect that he would stay for several years. Humans were emotional creatures. After a long time, it was inevitable that they would fall in love with each other. In particular, Zhu Lian was really good to Yao Yingjun. That was 100% trust. She appeared to resolve several crises. Over time, Yao Yingjun realized that he had fallen in love with her. After recognizing his feelings, Yao Yingjun was really scared. As an intelligence officer, the most basic rule was to learn how to act according to the situation. One shouldn't easily believe others, and shouldn't easily reveal one's true feelings. Obviously, Yao Yingjun had already violated these rules. It was because of this that he didn't report this matter. Instead, he suppressed this feeling in his heart and didn't tell anyone. Now that he knew that Zhu Huihua might want to rebel, and that Zhu Lian might also be implicated, he became even more anxious. He had to protect this girl's safety, but he couldn't reveal his own details. How could he do this? Perhaps Yao Yingjun could casually find a reason, such as going out to play. This way, he could justifiably leave the Guizhou department with Zhu Lian. But if he really did this, what would happen to Zhu Huilu? This was tantamount to openly resisting the mission. Once the higher-ups held him responsible, even if he had several heads, it wouldn't be enough to cut off. But if he didn't use this reason, did he have to reveal his identity? After thinking for a long time, Yao Yingjun felt a headache. In the end, he decided to target Meng Neng and Duan Yuhong. Not only were these two people trusted by the Prince of Lil, Nanming, but they also had their own abilities. For example, Duan Yuhong, who was known for his strange skills, and Meng Neng, who was known for his bravery, could be compared to Chen Tian, who was known for his eloquence, or even better. Of these two people, one was deeply trusted by Prince Guangtong, and had to consult him for almost everything he did. Meng Neng was in charge of the military power of Prince Guangtong. If Zhu Huilu wanted to cause his brother to rebel, Meng Neng definitely couldn't avoid it. Looking at the extra patrolling soldiers on the street, Yao Yingjun had a feeling that General Meng Neng might have been bribed. But he still decided to give it a try. This was how intelligence agents worked. Even if there was a 1% chance, they would still try their best, even if they had to pay the price with their lives. Because of his relationship with Zhu Lian, Yao Yingjun was once a guest of Meng Neng and Duan Yuhong. He didn't need to make an appointment to see them. He just walked in. As someone who had been to the general's residence more than once, Yao Yingjun's intuition told him that there was something wrong with this place. Before he joined the intelligence agency, he had undergone special physical training. Although Yao Yingjun's skills weren't as good as Lung Feng's, he was still much stronger than ordinary people. His eyesight was also better than ordinary people. The moment he entered the general's residence, he could feel the shadows in the dark. There were countless pairs of eyes staring at him. Yao Yingjun didn't look around. He acted as if he didn't notice anything. The moment he entered the general's residence, he shouted that he wanted to see General Meng Neng, and that he wanted to have a good fight with him. Naturally, his shouts attracted the attention of many people in the residence. Go, tell him that I'm patrolling the barracks and am not in the residence. In a dark corner of the courtyard, General Meng Neng's face revealed a hint of displeasure when he saw Yao Yingjun come uninvited. The housekeeper received the order and hurriedly went out to welcome Yao Yingjun. He used the excuse that the general was not in the residence and had gone to the barracks to persuade Yao Yingjun to leave. Soon, the housekeeper returned to Meng Neng's side and asked softly, "General, could he have sensed something?" He's just a gigolo. In the future, he won't even have the ability to be the head of the household. How could he have sensed something? All right, let's hurry up and prepare. We'll take action tomorrow night. Meng Neng sneered. It was obvious that Yao Ingjuan's usual disguise was effective. He was not treated like a piece of cake and reduced the possibility of being suspected. After leaving the general's residence, Yao Ingjuan's unruly appearance was completely hidden. After hesitating for a moment, he headed straight for the Duan residence. Compared to the Duan residence in the past, Yao Ingjun saw that there were many more strangers in the surrounding alleys and streets. With his identity as a spy, he quickly noticed that something was different. If he guessed correctly, this place was being watched. It was very likely that it was Meng Ning's doing. He had already shown his face at the general's residence once, and was almost forced to stay there. If he took the risk to appear at the Duan residence again, he was afraid that it would really arouse suspicion. For safety reasons, he didn't enter the Duan residence. Instead, he returned to the tea house. Since he couldn't get through to the higher-ups, he might as well start from the bottom. That was to spread rumors of Zhu Huitu's rebellion. As for how effective it would be, he wasn't sure. But other than that, what else could he do? Although he seemed to have a good relationship with some people because of his relationship with Zhu Lian, when it came to big matters, who would treat him like a piece of cake? When he left the tea house, Yao Ingjuan's footsteps were clearly faster. He didn't know what Meng Nung would do in the face of the rumors that would spread throughout the city. He didn't want to gamble, so the best thing to do was to bring Zhu Lian to a safe place to hide. 2 hours after Yao Ingjun left the tea house, the streets of Guizhou province began to spread rumors that Zhu Huitu, the prince of Guangdong, had sided with the southern Ming dynasty and was about to rebel. With the intelligence department's spies, the news quickly spread through the streets and alleys. It also spread to the general's residence and the prince of Little Nanming's residence. Who is it? Who leaked the news? Meng Nung said angrily after hearing the news. He had already made plans for the rebellion tomorrow night. Who would have thought that the news would be leaked? It seemed that everything had to change. General, the king has ordered you to make a trip to the prince's residence. Just as Meng Nung called the housekeeper over to discuss countermeasures, a servant reported that the prince of Little Nanming wanted to see him. General, you should bring more people with you. The housekeeper said worriedly. Of course. I wanted to do this secretly. Since it's like this, I might as well make it public. I'll go see the king now. You guys follow the plan and attack the other officials. Meng Ning wouldn't wait for death. Since he had promised Zhu Huitu to rebel with him, he couldn't go back on his word. Meng Nung made his move. Everything had been prepared long ago. The only difference was that one would take action tomorrow night, while the other would take action earlier. Because Meng Ning's actions were fast enough, the prince of Little Nanming, Zhu Huitu, was still caught by the rebels despite being prepared for it. It wasn't just Zhu Huitu. His other brother, the prince of Yangzhong, Duan Yuhong, and the others were also caught. The only one who was surprised was Princess Yongsheng. When a large group of soldiers entered the princess residence, they found out that she wasn't there. She had gone out with Yao Ingjun to play chase. A group of soldiers immediately went out of the city to chase. However, since Yao Ingjun was prepared, how could he be caught? Not to mention, he didn't even leave the city. Instead, he took Zhu Lian to a safe place to hide. Other than Zhu Lian and a few lucky officials and generals who weren't in the city, most people were controlled by Meng Nung. At this point, it was announced that they had changed positions and returned to the southern Ming court. Chapter 1064. The forces of the Little Nanming king, who was once viewed as a great enemy by the southern Ming dynasty, had collapsed just like that. Everything happened so quickly that it shocked many people. Yang Chendong used the advantage of the radio station to receive this news before anyone else. However, he only sighed. It was hard to guard against a thief in one's own home. After that, he no longer cared about it and began to focus on the negotiations in front of him. He had to pay attention to it. For this negotiation, the southern Ming dynasty had actually sent the crown prince's tutor and minister of war Kuang Yi to Linshan City. It was said that the diplomatic group was less than 30 li away and would arrive before nightfall. Young Master, Division Commander Lu Zhua and Lu Zhuatuan have returned. Beta Persei softly walked to Yang Chendong's side. Where is the foreign allied army? Yang Chendong asked as he nodded slightly. They should be able to reach Linchin City by tomorrow afternoon. Beta Persei estimated and replied. Beta Persei, do you think the foreign allied army is reliable? Due to what happened in the Guizhou division, Yang Chendong couldn't help but be suspicious. From the current situation, the rise of the five-star army was inevitable. It would be extremely difficult for others to defeat them. However, if something similar happened in the Guizhou division, it would be hard to say. Since there was a precedent, they had to be careful. This. Young master, do you have any ideas? Beta Persei couldn't answer, but his habit told him that since he asked such a question, the young master must have a solution. How about this in the future? If the foreign allied army's soldiers perform meritorious deeds, they will be directly promoted to the reserve division. This way, if the cold front lacks soldiers, they won't have to reevaluate them and can directly choose from the reserve division. Yang Chendong hesitated for a moment before speaking in an extremely confident tone. They had a reserve division before, but as the cold front continued to expand, they didn't have enough soldiers and had to temporarily withdraw this division. Now that a large number of non-humankind youngsters had joined the army, it was time for the army to recover. Okay, I'll do it right away. After understanding Yang Chendong's meaning, Beta Persei nodded heavily. He used to be the commander of a logistics division, which was equivalent to a concentration of soldiers. Therefore, he was quite experienced in this aspect. As for the selection of the division commander, the military department would decide on it, and the political department would review it. If there were no problems, it would be reported to the young master. Using people as a mirror, one can understand gains and losses. Using history as a mirror, one can understand the rise and fall of a nation. Since Yang Chendong knew where the others lost, he naturally wouldn't allow the same problem to happen to himself. That night, the north gate of Linchin City opened. Beta Persei, Tianhu Tiansu, and the others welcomed the Southern Ming special envoy into the city. In the back hall of the Yamen, Yang Chendong ordered people to prepare good wine and dishes for Kuang Yi. Speaking of Kuang Yi, Yang Chendong wasn't unfamiliar with him. Especially when they first met, this person's reputation and influence were above his. Only a few years had passed, and now the status of the two of them had undergone earth-shattering changes. Although Kuang Yi had also taken a small step forward, going from a second-rank official to a lower first-rank official, compared to Yang Chendong who had a different surname, the difference was not small. When they first met, Kuang Yi had no choice but to bow and say, "Special Envoy Kuang Yi greets Bugnam of Gojoseon." "Haha, Minister Kuang, there's no need for such formalities between us. Come have a seat." Yang Chendong chuckled. Yang Chendong's enthusiasm was the true reason why Zhu Qizhen had sent Kuang Yi. He wanted to use this friendship to play the emotional card. After the two sides sat down, Yang Chendong asked about Guaning while urging them to drink. Back then, Guaning was only a fifth-rank official. However, it was said that he had become a great general of the Southern Ming Empire, and was promoted to a second-rank general. Moreover, he was trusted by Zhu Qizhen. Kuang Yi naturally didn't hide anything from him. Not only did he talk about Guan Ying's current situation, he also said that Guaning missed Bugnam of Gojoseon a lot. If he wasn't on official business, he would have also come to visit. The atmosphere at the beginning of the banquet was good. The two sides only talked about old times and didn't talk about official matters. However, after 3 rounds of wine, the banquet ended and tea was served. The two people's expressions couldn't help but become more serious. In the end, it was Kuang Yi who couldn't help but speak first. "Bugnam of Gojoseon, Guangdong King Zhu Huixin has already surrendered to Emperor Ingzong. The era of the Southern Ming Empire will be gone forever. What do you think?" "Emperor Ingzong has made a good move. This king is impressed," Yang Chendong said with a fake smile. "Yes, my king is wise. The existence of the Southern Ming Empire has caused the commoners to lose their homes. Who knows how many people have lost their homes because of it? They indeed deserve to die," Kuang Yi also said with a look of admiration. As he spoke, he observed Yang Chendong as if he wanted him to express his admiration. Unfortunately, Yang Chendong's expression was normal. However, in Kuang Yi's eyes, he felt that this was very normal. Compared to the matter of Zhu Qizhen wiping out the little South Ming imperial court, what Yang Qindong and the Five-Star Army did was a huge matter. If one had to compare, the former was just a small fight in one's own garden. However, Yang Qindong had already displayed his fists and kicks outside, showing the might of the Han Empire. However, the Five-Star Army's strength was a bit too strong. They were so strong that their achievements had already shocked the emperor. Some people even said in private that if the Five-Star Army turned around one day, neither Bai Ming nor the Southern Ming Empire would be able to stop them. Unless the Great Ming Empire was reunited, they would be able to suppress the Five-Star Army. Of course, some people thought that they were smart. If one didn't understand the Five-Star Army, they wouldn't know how strong they were. If one hadn't truly fought with them, they wouldn't know how terrifying their battle strength was. It was a pity that some people could only see the small piece of land in front of them, but they always emphasized how high their vision was. It was laughable just thinking about it. Kuang Yi naturally wasn't a short-sighted person. He had already seen how powerful Yang Qindong was a few years ago. However, he didn't think that this person would develop so quickly. He had already taken over almost half of the Great Ming Empire's territory outside of the Great Ming Empire. It was also because of this that he strongly advocated for quickly destroying the Southern Ming Empire and unifying the Southern Ming Empire first. Then he would see if there was an opportunity to swallow Bai Ming. Only then would the Great Ming Empire be united and be able to work together to resist a powerful enemy. Of course, Kuang Yi wouldn't say these thoughts to Yang Qindong. At this time, he only said that the emperor was wise and wanted to unify the Southern Ming Empire first. In fact, there were some things that Yang Qindong could guess even if Kuang Yi didn't say it. Seeing Kuang Yi first flatter the emperor's brilliance, and then bemoan the state of the universe and pity the fate of mankind as he spoke of the suffering of the common people, he chuckled and said, "So it seems that the emperor and minister Kuang place great importance on the quality of life of the common people. Then, I wonder how the lives of the common people in the Southern Ming Dynasty have changed compared to before? Or rather, after the Southern Ming Empire's power was returned to the imperial court, what kind of preferential treatment did you give the common people?" Yang Qindong asked with the common people as the topic. He wouldn't forget that in the future, there were people who said that foreigners had a higher status than ordinary officials in the country. Because of this, they didn't have to abide by the laws of the country. Once something happened, they would put pressure on the embassy and use their bad international reputation as an excuse to show their nobility. It was because of this that Yang Qindong intentionally raised the status of Han people. He wanted the entire world to form a habit from this moment onwards. A habit that the Han people were high above and inviolable. Yang Qindong could do what he said because Yangshi started from scratch and instilled the idea of the supremacy of the Han people. The Southern Ming Empire couldn't do it. Or rather, the entire Great Ming Empire couldn't do it. The Great Ming Empire was like the feudal dynasties of the past. It was born in troubled times and paid attention to the inheritance of a family. It paid attention to the rule of the world through literature. This was why the status of the scholars in the Great Ming Empire was constantly rising. Thinking about it carefully, why were the scholars and officials so high in status? Wasn't it because they stepped on others to get to where they were? For example, the merchants, soldiers, and most importantly, the common people under their feet. For a country full of Han people, it wasn't realistic to talk about raising the status of the common people. It wasn't like Yang Xie, who conquered all kinds of places and placed Han people in them to show their high status. As the saying goes, without comparison, there is no hierarchy. Thus, even if the Southern Ming Empire was thinking for the common people, it couldn't be raised like the Han people in Yang Xie. Not to mention, the Southern Ming Empire's attitude towards the common people, especially those at the lowest level, had always been indifferent. How could they raise their status and treatment like Yang Qindong said? Kuang Ye's face turned red at Yang Qindong's question. He slowly lowered his head and said, "The common people are the people under the emperor's rule. Of course, we have to treat them better." The two words represented Yang Qindong's current mood. Fortunately, he knew that with the Southern Ming Empire's current situation, it was impossible for them to treat the common people better. He simply didn't care about this question and changed his tone. This time, Zhu Huichun was willing to surrender to you. What benefits did he give you? Normally, this was a private matter of the Southern Ming Empire, so it wasn't good for others to question it. However, Kuang Yi knew that with Yang Qindong's power, if he wanted to know the inside story, even if he didn't say it himself, he would be able to find out from others. Most importantly, this matter was going to be revealed to the world soon, so it was impossible to hide it. Thus he directly said, "The emperor made Zhu Huichun the prince of the 3 provinces. He will be in charge of the military of Yunnan, Guangxi and Guizhou." The prince of the 3 provinces. After Yang Qindong heard this, he nodded and said, "Only in charge of military affairs, not local government, right?" Chapter 1065. Kuang Yi didn't expect Yang Qindong to be so smart and be able to see the crux of the problem at a glance. He nodded. Bugnam of Gojosian is right. He only has military power and no financial power. Once he offends the emperor and cuts off his provisions, I'm afraid it will be difficult for him to command any army. What a wishful thinking. Yang Qindong exposed Zhu Qizhen's thoughts while chatting. Kuang Yi's face turned red again. Yang Qindong was speaking the truth. This time, Zhu Huihua was indeed deceived by Zhu Qizhen. Not explaining was equivalent to admitting it. Yang Qindong couldn't help but ask with interest, "This explanation isn't very clever. If this prince can see it, others can also see it. Does the king of the 3 provinces not have any objections?" "Yes, but His Majesty allowed him to trade with the kingdom of Banga. Apart from handing over 30% of the profits to the imperial court, he could keep the rest for himself." Kuang Yi didn't hide any deep secrets either, so he spoke with a straight face. Trade with the Bengal army? Yang Qindong was a little surprised, but after thinking about it he understood. Zhu Huihua had replaced his elder brother Zhu Huihua's position. If he still controlled the military and political power of the 3 provinces, it would be no different from the previous Little Southern Ming. This was something that Zhu Qizhen couldn't tolerate. It was because of this that both sides took a step back. One side wanted military power, while the other side wanted administrative and financial power. This was equivalent to each side taking what they needed. He sighed in his heart. It was a good plan. However, there was a prerequisite for all of this. For example, whether he agreed, whether Yang Xie agreed, and whether the 5-star army agreed. The 3 provinces were close to the Yunnan province. If they didn't deal with Yang Qindong, there wouldn't be peaceful days here. Needless to say, the Southern Ming Empire's food and the goods that the 3 provincial kings would trade with would have to rely on Yang Qindong. This was the main reason why they had sent Chen Tian and Kuang Yi to negotiate. Finally knowing the truth, Yang Qindong was no longer anxious. Now that it was someone else who needed his help, he could take his time to think about it. Therefore, he didn't take the initiative to ask questions, and instead allowed Kuang Yi to speak. After seeing that Yang Qindong didn't have anything to ask, Kuang Yi opened his mouth as expected. The first thing that came out of his mouth was His Majesty's words. As if everything was His Majesty's will, and he was just a messenger. If Yang Qindong had any opinions or questions, he would be responsible for conveying them, but he couldn't make the decision. It was no wonder that Kuang Yi was so careful. It was said that a weak country had no diplomacy. Besides, Yang Qindong was completely different from the one he met a few years ago. Now that the Southern Ming Dynasty had a favor to ask of them, how could they not speak some soft words? Bugnam of Gojosian, His Majesty said that as long as you agree to this decision, our Southern Ming Empire will publicly recognize your title as Bugnam of Gojosian. This is a king with a different surname. Other than a few people who were conferred the title when Taizu was still alive, only King Shiping is left. This honor is so great and so high. Bugnam of Gojosian, His Majesty also said that the Liangshan shelter is allowed to exist. As long as you don't steal or rob, and the people can enter the shelter, we will turn a blind eye and pretend that we didn't see anything. Bugnam of Gojosian, His Majesty also said. Next, Kuang Yi represented Zhu Qizhen of the Ying sect and made promises again and again. Yang Qindong became a listener, but he just sat there and didn't say anything. After about half an hour, Everything that needed to be said was said. Kuang Yi looked at Yang Chendong and asked in a low voice, "Bugnam of Gojoseon, what do you think?" This wasn't the first time he said this. It was enough to prove that Yang Chendong's position in Kuang Ye's heart was very important and high. However, Yang Chendong still didn't say anything, as if he was asleep. Under Kuang Ye's continuous questioning, Yang Chendong raised his head as if he had just woken up from a dream and said, "This is far from enough. I'm afraid that Minister Cheng still doesn't know that 2 or 3 days ago, the 5-Star Army's 1st Cavalry Division was surrounded by Zhu Huilu, who killed many of our soldiers. If we don't take revenge, how can we convince the public?" But at that time, the 3 provincial kings hadn't become part of the Southern Ming Empire. Now he's already one of His Majesty's people. Kuang Yi wanted to explain more, but Yang Chendong said, "Yes, it's because I know that he's now one of the Southern Ming Empire's people that I didn't do anything to them. I just wanted to see what Minister Cheng would say. Now it seems that your sincerity is far from enough." Not enough? Kuang Yi understood the meaning behind his words. It wasn't that he couldn't, but that it wasn't enough. That meant that there was still room for discussion. He asked curiously, "But does King Nanwu have any other requests?" "You can make the decision?" "No, I can pass on King Nanwu's request to His Majesty. At the same time, I will do my best to help." Kuang Yi didn't dare to say too much. "All right, since Minister Cheng is so sincere, this prince might as well say a few things." Yang Chendong knew that the time was right. It was time for him to speak. He immediately mentioned that he was interested in the Southern Ming Empire's silk, tea leaves, and porcelain. He was interested in some masters and wanted to hire them to work in Crimson City at a high price. At the same time, he wanted to buy a certain percentage of the goods at cost price, and then sell them to merchants from other countries under the name of Crimson City. It was said that Suhong's silk was of the best quality. Crimson City also spent some effort to imitate it, but unfortunately, the results weren't very good despite investing a lot of manpower and resources. For this, City Lord Yu Qian had represented the local factories to ask Yang Chendong more than once if they could bring in some talents to Crimson City. For this matter, the intelligence department had also tried, but the skilled workers were all restricted by the local masters. That place wasn't Yang Xie's territory, so it was very difficult to get all these people away without anyone noticing. This was a perfect opportunity to bring in talents, while also dealing a blow to the Southern Ming Empire. Once the Southern Ming Empire lost the advantage of silk, porcelain, and tea leaves, Yang Xie would have a better chance of winning against the Southern Ming Empire. This matter needs to be reported to His Majesty before he can make a decision. Kuang Yi didn't immediately agree. Instead, he said that he needed to report it first. Yang Chendong could understand that Kuang Yi couldn't make a decision on such a big matter. Thus, he nodded in tacit agreement. Then he raised a second request, which was to ask for people. This time, Zhu Huiyan attacked the shelter without any reason. Not only did thousands of soldiers die, but 40,000 civilians also ran away. This matter had to be mentioned. Thus, not only did the Southern Ming Empire have to admit it, they also had to compensate the 40,000 people. After hearing this, Kuang Yi frowned and said, "Okay, this old man will also report this matter to His Majesty." He didn't expect Ng Zong to agree at all, but Yang Chendong still said it. He just wanted to give him a heads up. After all, Zhu Qizhen used to be great Ming Zong. Even if he agreed in his heart, he wouldn't say it out loud. After knowing this, Yang Chendong didn't place his hopes on the Southern Ming Empire. Instead, he placed it on Zhu Huiyan. Some things couldn't be handled by a county official. Yang Chendong then found the detained Chen Tian. Different from Kuang Yi, he maintained a serious gaze. He even called a few teachers in front of Kuang Yi and ordered them to prepare for battle. They were to leave Linshan City and head north at any time. Chen Tian didn't hide any of this from him. After the teachers left the hall, he naturally yelled, "King Nanwu, what are you doing? Must you become enemies with our King Guangtong?" "Wrong, if it wasn't for this king becoming enemies with you. It was you who became enemies with us first." Yang Chendong turned around and angrily rebuked Chen Tian. "Yes, we sent troops to attack your shelter first, but we didn't gain anything. Furthermore, even if we did something wrong, We can make up for it. Didn't I come this time to listen to your requests and conditions? What's the meaning of sending troops without talking about anything? Chen Tian yelled. It could be seen that he was truly anxious this time. It could be seen that not only him, but even his master, King Guangtong, didn't want to become enemies with the five-star army again. Previously, Zhu Huiyan attacked the five-star army because he wanted to use this method to show everyone his strength. Now he had suffered losses against the five-star army. He had even almost destroyed one of the enemy's cavalry divisions. However, to be able to make the five-star army suffer losses like this was not something an ordinary person could do. Just from this point alone, Zhu Huiyan's goal had been achieved. He had also successfully received the Southern Ming Empire's amnesty. Since all of his goals had been achieved, there was naturally no need to continue fighting. If he won, no one would say anything, but if he lost, he would only feel bad. Zhu Huiyan knew this, so he sent the most eloquent person, Chen Tian, over. He only had one request, which was for the five-star army to stop fighting. As for whether the other party would raise any requests or conditions, as long as they weren't too excessive, he would agree. After all, he wanted to step on the five-star army to climb up. You said that we can talk. All right, then I'll give you a chance to talk. If you can't satisfy me, then there won't be a chance to talk. Yang Chendong spoke as if there was only one chance, and he wanted them to grasp it seriously. The 5 divisions and close to 100,000 soldiers finally arrived at Linchin City. At this point, Yang Chendong had over 100,000 soldiers. He indeed had the qualifications to cause a ruckus in the Southern Ming Empire's territory. However, these 100,000 soldiers didn't take a step forward, nor did they have any intentions of attacking. This was all because the negotiations were going smoothly. Chen Tian was very tactful. He clearly agreed to all of Yang Chendong's requests. However, this matter was very important, so he had to report it to Zhu Huiyan. Chapter 1066. Kuang Yi and Chen Tian both stayed in Linchin City. Only their trusted aides left the city to inform the higher-ups of Yang Chendong's request. Linchin City regained its usual peace. A few days later, news of the little Southern Ming prince and Yangzhong prince being captured in the Guizhou division was spread. At this point, the little Southern Ming army was disbanded. Under the leadership of General Meng Neng, their army joined the 3rd province Prince Zhu Huizhou's army. Meng Neng brought over 300,000 troops. Adding on Zhu Huizhou's original army, even without the 100,000 from the Bangladesh army, he still had 500,000 troops. Young master, this. After Beta Persei received the news, he looked worriedly at Yang Chendong. What are you afraid of? 500,000 isn't a small number, but with 3 provinces, how many troops do you think he can transfer to Linchin City? Or how many troops would he need to deal with us? After Yang Chendong asked 2 questions in a row, he smiled and patted Beta Persei's shoulder. Don't worry, the plan won't change. Yang Chendong was indeed full of confidence. He predicted that Zhu Huizhou wouldn't make an enemy out of the 5-star army. After all, the time to prove his strength had passed. Now that he had been recruited as the 3rd province prince, there was no need to create more problems. If they really fought, Zhu Huizhou didn't have the confidence to win. Not to mention, there was one more thing that he didn't mention. Yao Yingjun had taken Zhu Lian and escaped from the Guizhou department. Not only that, they had also created an army of 50,000 people and were currently fighting for territory in the 3 provinces. Speaking of which, this was out of Yang Chendong's expectations. Yao Yingjun was a chess piece he placed in the little Southern Ming prince's faction. Now that this faction was destroyed, he had completed his mission. Yao Yingjun thought the same. He even wanted to bring Princess Yingjun out and find a safe place in Yangxia, so that she could live the rest of her life without worries. Who would have thought that at this time, a woman would actually show that she was not inferior to men? After learning that her 2nd brother had betrayed her, and her eldest brother and 3rd brother had been captured, she actually took up the responsibility. Moreover, she really allowed him to persuade some of the small South Ming soldiers outside of the Guizhou division to rebuild the mountain. When this matter was reported to Yang Chendong through the intelligence network, he was also surprised for a while. Thinking about it, This was a good thing. He didn't have to pay a price to make his opponent restless, so why not? Yang Chendong agreed and sent someone to inform Yao Yingjun that if things did not go well, he could still bring Princess Yongxing to the Langshan shelter. At the same time, he also told him that if he needed financial support, he could ask. With all of this, Yang Chendong was sure that Zhu Huitu, who seemed to be very powerful, would not make an enemy out of the 5-star army. Things developed as he expected. When the people sent by Qin Tian met with the 3 provincial kings and told them about Yang Chendong's request, the 3 provincial kings who tried to assassinate his brother quickly agreed to all of the conditions. Zhu Huizhou agreed to Yang Chendong's request and recognized the legitimacy of the shelter. As long as any Han citizen went there, regardless of their status, they wouldn't pursue the matter. Not only that, every year he would provide 200,000 Han citizens to the shelter as compensation for attacking the 5-star army. In exchange, Crimson City's goods could be provided to Zhu Huihua at the same price as other merchants. Originally, Yang Chendong wanted to provide 500,000 people a year, but Qin Tian refused. In his words, 200,000 was already a lot. At most, the 3 provinces wouldn't have enough Han citizens, and they could just grab some from the nearby southern Ming province. However, 500,000 a year, they wouldn't be able to catch that many. Actually, 200,000 a year was already enough to satisfy Yang Chendong. Originally, he was just asking for an exorbitant price, waiting for the other party to bargain. Giving 30 to 50,000 people a year was already what he had expected. Now 200,000 a year was already a pleasant surprise. Not long after, the southern Ming Emperor Zhu Qizhen also agreed. After discussing with the court officials, they finally agreed to sell the silk, tea leaves, and porcelain to the 5-star army. This was something that couldn't be helped. Many areas in the south of the southern Ming Empire had already been occupied by the 5-star army. If they didn't agree, they wouldn't be able to sell these things for money. As for those skilled workers, since when did the great Ming Empire value craftsmen? If they were gone, they could just nurture them again. Thus they all agreed. The negotiations with the 2 sides went very smoothly, reaching Yang Chendong's expectations. After the negotiations were completed, Yang Chendong knew that he had to leave this place. Even Linchin City and Siming residence had to be given up. These were the bargaining chips in the negotiations. Retreat. Since he had achieved his goal, Yang Chendong gave the order to retreat. Hundreds of thousands of 5-star army escorted the 40,000 prisoners out of Linchin City. At this time, the battle ended and everything returned to normal. However, any smart person could tell that this wasn't the end. Once the 2 sides started fighting again, they wouldn't stop until one side was dead. The 5-star army finally retreated, leaving behind Linchin City and Siming residence. At the same time, Zhu Huiying also left behind 2 opponents, Everlasting Victory Princess and Sheeping King's army. Everlasting Victory Princess didn't need to be mentioned. When Zhu Huiying made his move, he didn't plan to let this sister go. As for Sheeping King, he was originally the king of Yunnan. Now that the 3 provincial kings wanted to replace him, how could he agree? Of course, he had to find some trouble. Zhu Qizhen didn't think highly of the 3 provincial kings, but he had to agree to reduce internal friction. Now that Sheeping King was willing to fight with Zhu Huiying, he was happy to see it happen. He didn't say anything and just let them fight. After Yang Chendong left southern Ming's territory, he didn't pay attention to it anymore. Yang Xie's territory was so big that there were too many things for him to worry about. For example, there was a piece of information in front of him about the Baiming army. The telegram was sent by the commander of the First Army, Tiger's Man. It only said one thing. The Baiming army had a 50,000-man cavalry. They were all soldiers from the Liaodong region, and were nicknamed the Liaodong Iron Cavalry. Under the leadership of General Fang Dingshan, they were training in the grasslands. They constantly clashed with the small Mongolian tribes, and sometimes provoked Yeshen and Walla. They won and lost. According to Tiger's Man's telegram, the 50,000-man Liaodong Iron Cavalry followed the policy of training soldiers through battles. Fang Dingshan used to be the commander of Zhu Qiyu's imperial bodyguards. He was quite trusted and was given a lot of freedom on this expedition. Since their appearance, the Baiming army's banner became famous in the grasslands and had a certain amount of influence. They're all restless people. Yang Chundong sighed, and then looked at another telegram. It was sent by the Internal Intelligence Department of the Japanese Empire. The internal strife there had already begun, and some places had already broken out of the control of the emperor and the great general's office. In other words, it wouldn't be long before the Japanese Empire's affairs had to be resolved. Thinking about Princess Junko, who had returned more than a year ago, Yang Chundong looked in the direction of the Japanese Empire and said to himself, "Don't let anything happen to you. Otherwise, a lot of people will be buried with you." January 1457 AD. Yang Chundong returned to Qiqian City and prepared to spend the new year here. At the same time, he accompanied his wife, Hu Yan, to wait for her delivery. On the 7th day of the 2nd lunar month, on this seemingly ordinary day, a baby boy was born. When Yang Chundong was 20 years old, he finally had his first son, named Yang Bo Bugnam of Gojoseon finally had a son, and there was someone to inherit the family name. Naturally, it was a great day for the entire Yangxia. Qiqian City was immediately decorated, and it was even more lively than the new year. The various provinces and regions under the Yang faction also sent representatives to the city with gifts to celebrate and express their joy. Good things come in pairs. On the 3rd day after Yang Bo was born, King Abu Burkle of the Great F country announced his surrender in Cotton Orchid Island. After more than half a year of siege, the city was already in chaos. Originally, Abu Burkle wanted to continue supporting because he still had soldiers and food in his hands. However, the people had already had enough of these days of fear. Under the instigation of the intelligence department in the city, they rushed into the city and surrounded the palace. The power of the people was great, especially when it came to their own safety. Often, they could exert unimaginable power. Facing the flood of people, the soldiers of the Great F country did not stop them. In the end, Abu Burkle was captured. The city gate was opened and he was sent to the cold front navy that surrounded the city. With the capture of Abu Burkle, the fall of the Great F country was announced, and the entire Luzon Island was unified. At this point, the Great F country and the original Sulu country were all under Yangxia's control. Yangxia also gained more than 6 million people, and its strength increased by a large margin. In more than a year, Siam and the Great F country were divided. With more than 10 million people, Yangxia's strength was evident. However, this time, Yang Chundong only moved the 6 million people in Siam's current Tai province. Half of the 3 million people were moved to other provinces. The 6 million people in Luzon Island were not moved. They were reserved for the next move to the Japanese Empire. At that time, 5 million people would be sent to the Japanese Empire. Yes, Yang Chundong had raised his butcher's knife. The next target of his plan was the Japanese Empire. The reason why he said it was a plan was because Yang Chundong could not guarantee that there would not be other accidents. For example, the sudden appearance of the 50,000 Liaodong Iron Cavalry in Baiming was an accident. According to the report of the new army commander, Tiger's Mane, this Iron Cavalry was very arrogant on the grassland. Not only did they have the opportunity to clash with the Walla Iron Cavalry, but they also occasionally encountered caravans that traded with the first city. Although they could not kill and rob, they still had to pay for the passage. Chapter 1067. Perhaps it was because the Liaodong Iron Cavalry was short of money, or perhaps they didn't want to provoke a powerful existence like the 5-star army right away. But even if they didn't kill anyone, they just wanted money, which made some caravans that cooperated with the first city suffer. During this time, many merchants came to the door and complained to Tiger's Man. According to them, they would rather give the money to the 5-star army than to the Liaodong Iron Cavalry. The appearance of the Liaodong Iron Cavalry greatly changed many people's view of Baiming. Is this still the army of the Great Ming Dynasty? Why are they so barbaric? How are they different from the bandits on the grassland? Are they still the grass-eating Han Chinese? Previously, there was the 5-star army, and now there was Baiming's Liaodong Iron Cavalry. What changed them? For this matter, Tiger's Man sent a telegram to Yang Chundong more than once, asking if he wanted to attack them. After all, one mountain couldn't accommodate 2 tigers. It was enough to have the 5-star army on the grassland. Yang Chendong suppressed Tiger's man's intention to attack. He now had a target to conquer, the Japanese Empire. This was a country with a population of more than 10 million people. If he wanted to conquer them, the preparation work must be very thorough. The people of the Japanese Empire were very fertile. This could be seen from their names, such as Dairo, Ero Saburo. There were even 7 and 8 Dairo. This might have something to do with the environment they lived in and their development over the years. It was very easy for each region to be independent. Sometimes, even 2 counties that were very close to each other would see each other as fire and water, and would fight with each other. At that time, whoever had more people would often have the advantage. For a country with such a large population, Yang Chendong must be well prepared. He couldn't afford to be distracted. Not to mention that in his heart, it was difficult to divide the world into 2 for a long time. And the tripartite balance was the most stable. The existence of Beiming, Southern Ming, and himself was the tripartite balance, which could ensure that any side would have to be wary of the other side when they attacked. While rejecting Tiger's man's idea of attacking on the grassland, he also asked him to prepare the new army that had been formed for a year to be transferred to North Korea. In addition to preparing for an attack on the Japanese Empire, Yang Chendong also called the city lord Yu Qian and other important people in the palace to discuss the introduction of paper money. The introduction of paper money was not Yang Chendong's creation. At the beginning of the Ming Dynasty, Zhu Yuanzhang implemented the paper money policy and issued the Ming Dynasty's precious banknotes and copper coins. However, the Great Ming Dynasty's banknotes did not have a limit, and there was no reserve, which quickly led to inflation. Now, the Great Ming Dynasty's banknotes were restricted in the market. Although they were still circulating, their purchasing power was very limited, especially after the sudden rise of Yang Chendong. Regardless of whether it was the Northern Ming or the Southern Ming, in order to achieve their goals, they vigorously printed the Great Ming banknote, which directly caused the market to become chaotic. At the same time, this item depreciated even more, and there were very few people who recognized it. With this example, Yang Chendong obviously wouldn't let the same mistake happen to him. This time, not only did he want the paper money to be successful, but it also had to be strong for a long time. For this, he ordered people to vigorously develop the gold mines found on the island of Dafei as reserves. He was preparing to introduce the paper money into the market. First, it has to be anti-counterfeiting. Second, it has to be advertised properly. Third, and most important, is that it can't be casually published. The amount of reserves can only be printed to achieve the same value as gold and silver. Yang Chendong said to City Lord Yu Qian, and the people in charge of the Yang family's bank with a serious expression. After all, the circulation of gold and silver was a bit too costly. In the long run, the people who would suffer losses would be the country and the people. It could be said that the paper money was a very necessary thing. After handing over the issue of the paper money to professionals, Yang Chendong started to mobilize the troops. This time, he was preparing to deal with the Japanese Empire. He was preparing to bring 150,000 soldiers. This could be said to be the largest number of soldiers he had ever brought. Among them, the 1st Cavalry Division was already making preparations to be mobilized. There was also the 1st Cavalry Division that must be brought along. This was a very elite force. With them, many things would be done with half the effort. Then there was the C4th Division, the C5th Division, the 1st Reserve Division, the 1st Division, the 2nd Division, and the 3rd Division. In total, there were close to 150,000 people. Not only were the troops ready to assemble in North Korea, Yang Chendong was also preparing 6 million people to go to the Japanese Empire. For example, Luzon Island had to prepare 5 million people, and even the provinces and regions had to prepare 1 million people. This was the preparation to uproot the entire country. At the same time, Yang Chendong took the opportunity to inspect some of the important industries in Chichen City. Yang Chendong paid special attention to the munitions factory. 2 years ago, he had brought out a Type 99 tank from the warehouse and placed it in the factory. Now that so much time had passed, he wanted to know how the imitation work was going. Imitation was one of Yang Xie's main policies for industrial development. First, there would be a finished product and a method. Then he would try to learn how to do it. Only then would he be able to walk his own path. It was just like how many products and firearms were made. The Han people, who had 5,000 years of history, had never lacked intelligent people. However, this time, Yang Chendong was somewhat disappointed. There was simply too much information and knowledge involved in the creation of a tank. Even though there was already a finished product in front of everyone, they had never seen how it was used. Under the circumstances of how it was used, there was no way to imitate it even if they wanted to. Therefore, this time, Yang Chendong came to the munitions factory to demonstrate how to use the tank. Clear the area. Except for the necessary relevant researchers and the main leaders of the munitions factory, everyone else was cleared out of the area. Then, Yang Chendong walked into the big iron tool, with a tank hat on his head. Under everyone's gaze, the tank that was filled with fuel started moving. With a roar, it walked out of the secret workshop and appeared in the empty field. This scene was too much of a shock to everyone. The roaring sound had already frightened everyone. When they saw that this thing could already move under the control of a single person, everyone present widened their eyes and looked like they had been shocked silly. Then, an even more shocking scene appeared. After the tank arrived at the field, it first moved quickly and skillfully turned. Along the way, it knocked down many obstacles that had been prepared beforehand. Then it stood still and fired at an area that had been marked out long ago. In the roar of the explosion, the target area a few miles away was hit, and smoke rose from it. Plop! This eye-popping scene attracted everyone present to kneel. Even the city lord Yu Qian, who accompanied Yang Chendong to watch, and Yang Heir, who had been following Yang Chendong for many years and had long been accustomed to various miracles, also knelt on the ground. Yang Chendong was very powerful. He was once called the Lord God, as if he was a god that had descended to earth. But even if they were fully prepared, the moment they saw the shell fired, everyone was still shocked and knelt on the ground. They didn't dare to imagine. If this iron tool were to be used on a large scale, once it appeared on the battlefield, who would have the ability to stop it? They were afraid that when the time came, it would only be a rush, and the thousands of soldiers and horses would be scared silly and scattered. When everyone knelt on the ground, the tank extinguished the fire and stopped. Yang Chendong, with a tank hat on his head, got out of the cockpit. His appearance here attracted loud shouts that shook the heavens and the earth. If one listened carefully, they would hear the three lords of God talking nonstop. Well, this thing is somewhat magical, but it's more of a function of technology. So you choose two people, and I'll teach them how to drive and operate it. When Yang Chendong's voice resounded in the training ground, for these two places, the people below could be said to be red in the face and ears. They all wanted to feel the power of this iron tool, and they all wanted to be in close contact with the divine object. For a full 10 days, except for going back to the palace to visit his son and daughter at night, Yang Chendong stayed in the training ground most of the time. And this place had been taken over by Longwei. No one was allowed to approach without orders, or they had the right to act first and report later. It was precisely because they had seen the power of the tank that Longwei believed that any level of defense was appropriate. In 10 days, the two disciples taught by Yang Chendong had barely finished their apprenticeship. Next, they could only rely on continuous practice to reach the level of familiarity. After that, Yang Chendong left the training ground and returned to the palace. There was news from the Japanese Empire that internal strife had begun. And now it was already April 1457. Back to half a month ago, in the Japanese Empire's capital, Pingan, Beijing, Princess Junko, who had returned to the Japanese Empire for 2 years, made use of her strengths and established a school called Jinsing Academy. She widely accepted students and taught advanced knowledge, which was constantly expanding its influence. When Jinsing Academy was first established, it didn't attract much attention. On the contrary, it attracted people's ridicule. In the Japanese Empire, the status of women was naturally subordinate to men. They often believed more than China that a woman without talent was virtuous. It was not surprising that Junko was a princess. Fortunately, Junko's actions received the support of the emperor, who was also his father, the Garden Emperor. There was no other way, His son, Chenin, was only 15 years old, and Junko, who was already 20 years old, naturally became the person that the emperor valued. Speaking of which, the emperor only had a good name, but his life was not easy. In the history of the Japanese Empire, since the end of the Heian period, the emperor, who originally had absolute control over the Japanese Empire, began to lose his power. In 1192 AD, Minamoto no Yoritamo established the Kamakura shogunate, and the emperor began to fall and became a puppet of the Kamakura shogunate. Later in history, the emperor became a puppet of the Muromachi shogunate. The emperor became a puppet of the shogunate for more than 600 years. Not only did he not have any real power, but sometimes even his basic necessities, such as food, shelter, and transportation and holding ceremonies, had problems due to financial constraints. The most typical example was the 103rd generation emperor, Hoto Miyamoto. He was Junko's younger brother. Chapter 1068. Emperor Hoto was born in 1442 AD. His name was Chungren, and he was the eldest son of the 102nd emperor of the Chrysanthemum Dynasty. His mother was the queen of the emperor of the Chrysanthemum Dynasty, Fujiwara. When Emperor Hoto was born, the situation of the imperial court in Kyoto was terrible. First, the real power was in the hands of the Shitachi shogunate, and the emperor was a puppet. Second, the national treasury could not make ends meet, and it was not even enough to pay the salaries of the imperial court officials, let alone meet the expenses of the imperial court. Therefore, even though Emperor Hoto was born in the imperial court, he sometimes did not even have enough food and clothing. Even the wedding ceremony of marrying Princess Tingtian was held hastily. In history, the emperor of the Chrysanthemum Dynasty abdicated and became the supreme emperor. The 22-year-old Emperor Hoto inherited the throne and became the 103rd emperor of the Chrysanthemum Dynasty. Princess Tingtian then became the empress. However, due to the tight financial situation, the imperial court in Kyoto held a very shabby ceremony to save money. Even after he died, because he did not have the money to bury him, his corpse was frozen in the imperial palace for 2 months. Some officials had to raise money to bury him. From this situation, one could imagine the status of the emperor. This was the main reason why they were willing to spend a lot of money to buy the cannons from the 5-star army. It was because the military and political power was controlled by General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. If he did not die, the imperial family would never be able to rise up. However, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's whereabouts were uncertain. No one knew when he went in and out of the general's house. The emperor only bought 1 cannon and 2 bullets from the 5-star army, so he did not dare to take the risk. Since his daughter was willing to come out and do something, the emperor would definitely support her. It was this Zhenqing Academy that no one thought highly of. After 2 years of development, they could not recruit any students. But now, there were people who were willing to take the initiative to learn. They could not satisfy the 50 students they taught at one time, which attracted the attention of other forces. General Ashikaga Yoshimasa was one of them. First, he sent people to catch the former student. After some investigation, he found that the former student was extraordinarily talented. However, he was just the most ordinary student in the first batch of students in Zhenqing Academy, but he had such a great change, which attracted the attention of the general. Since she is capable, beautiful, and a princess, then let's marry her. General Ashikaga Yoshimasa said to his subordinates. Soon, the news that the general wanted to marry Princess Junko spread among the higher-ups. Some abilities should be used. This was the attitude of the strong to the weak. Maybe he wanted Junko to work for him, or maybe he just wanted to marry Junko and throw her at home as a concubine and live a peaceful life. But no matter what the result was, the emperor's power of the emperor. Of course, Junko wouldn't agree to it. She went to the emperor and expressed her determination that she would rather die. How could the emperor did not know his daughters? But what could he? He didn't have much military power, and he didn't have any political partners. He couldn't win. Just when the emperor was at his wits' end and Junko was about to commit suicide, a savior appeared. Oda Nagamasa was a powerful general in the capital of Pinyin. He was also the only collaborator that the emperor had managed to rope in over the years. He proposed that he could agree to the Supreme General's request, but before the wedding he wanted to meet the Supreme General to discuss some details. The location of the meeting was set at the Supreme General's mansion. The military system of the Japanese Empire was divided from the bottom to the top. It was divided into soldiers, infantry captains in charge of 100 people, infantry captains in charge of 500 people, elders in charge of 1,000 people, generals in charge of 2,000 people, magistrates in charge of 10,000 people, chiefs in charge of 20,000 people, daimyo in charge of 50,000 people, generals in charge of 60,000 to 80,000 people, generals in charge of 60,000 to 80,000 people, and the emperor at the top. Oda Nagamasa was one of the generals with real power under General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. He had more than 70,000 soldiers. He came up with this idea to kill the general and replace him. Before, he couldn't find a chance to attack Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Why not use this opportunity to trick him into coming to the general's mansion, and then kill him in one fell swoop? In this way, Oda Nagamasa could replace him, and the emperor's power could be restored to a certain extent. This idea was quickly supported by the emperor and Princess Junko. This was their reply to the great general, and the great general agreed without hesitation. There had been news about the imperial family purchasing a cannon from the Five Stars Palace. But after so many years there was no news about it, and it gradually faded away. Even General Ashikaga Yoshimasa thought it was fake news. It was precisely because of this that the general politely agreed. He thought that the royal family wanted to save face, so he would give them face. In the future, when Junko became his woman, wouldn't he be able to bully her however he wanted? With a good start, the plan was carried out smoothly. The day before the agreed meeting, the Type 59-1 130mm cannon that he had spent 10 million taels of silver to buy finally took off its disguise after being covered in dust for many years. Furthermore, the only 2 cannonballs were also taken out. In order to ensure that nothing would go wrong, after the first shot was fired, the second shot had to be promptly followed up. The Five-Star Army had already adjusted the target, and the target was the general's mansion. No one dared to touch it in these years, and now it was finally the time to use it. This matter made the emperor, Junko, and Oda Nagamasa become very excited. After a long night of waiting, dawn finally came. When the time of the meeting was getting closer and closer, the emperor and the others held their breath. They were about to witness a miracle, a scene that changed history. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the two sides agreed to meet at the general's mansion. The shell was put into the Type 59-1 130mm cannon, and then a deafening sound was heard. The shell arc across the sky went straight into the general's mansion, causing a shocking feeling like an earthquake. It hit. The soldiers of the Japanese Empire, who fired the cannon, shouted excitedly, "Isn't there still one more shell? Fire it again." General Oda Nagamasa said excitedly. He was afraid that Ashikaga Yoshimasa wouldn't die. He didn't believe that the general wouldn't die after firing 2 shells. Under the attack of the 2 powerful cannons, the entire general's mansion was covered. Even if the area of the mansion was not small, more than 70% of the area was killed. Especially the main building was destroyed. As long as Ashikaga Yoshimasa stayed in the general's mansion, his fate was almost set in stone. In the imperial palace, you could even see the fire and smoke coming from the general's mansion. This scene made the emperor, Junko, and Oda Nagamasa very excited. They were shocked by the power of the cannons, and they were also excited that the situation in the Japanese Empire would soon change. The situation had indeed changed, but the General Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't die. It wasn't because he was smart enough to see through everything. The problem lay with Oda Nagamasa. His most trusted deputy, Kayome Sakuki, suddenly betrayed him and told the Supreme Shogun about the plan. At the last moment, they escaped from the mansion and avoided a fatal disaster. When Oda Nagamasa heard the news, he saw the general's army outside the imperial palace. Fortunately, in order to celebrate the victory and successfully seize military power, Oda Nagamasa had transferred tens of thousands of his own soldiers to guard the palace. Now they were finally put to good use. Hold on, hold on. At the same time, Oda Nagamasa was also preparing to break out of the imperial palace. In his view, even if Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't die, Ping and Beijing wasn't a place where he could live for a long time. As for whether he needed to take the emperor and his family with him when he left, don't be ridiculous, it was already difficult to protect himself. Who would think about other things? Oda Nagamasa wanted to escape. Once he left, it could be imagined that the Supreme General's anger would definitely be vented on the emperor. If that was the case, although they might not die, it would be far worse and more painful than death. So leaving the imperial palace was a must. General Oda, please take us with you. The emperor didn't care about his face and lowered his noble head. Yes. Oda Nagamasa wanted to refuse. But Princess Junko said, General, I have a very good relationship with the leader of the 5-star army. As long as you can take us away, I will send someone to contact them and ask for their support to deal with Ashikaga Yoshimasa. By the way, the leader is my teacher. As if she was afraid that Oda Nagamasa would refuse, Junko added a master and apprentice as a bargaining chip. Everyone in the Japanese Empire knew that the Han people attached great importance to the relationship between master and apprentice. This sentence made Oda Nagamasa, who was about to refuse, change his attitude. He could indeed escape and even take the emperor's family with him. However, if he did so, he would only draw the great general's anger onto himself. With his 70,000 soldiers, there was no way he could stop the great general. So he wanted to keep the emperor and his family to attract the general's attention and anger. But at the same time, he knew even more clearly that even if he managed to escape this time, it would be impossible for him to regain his power. It was even very likely that he would become an existence that everyone wanted to kill. He had no idea how long he could last. But now it was completely different. If he could get the help of the 5-star army, the situation would be reversed. If you don't believe it, just look at the power of the 2 cannons. Oda Nagamasa's eyes rolled for a moment. He originally wanted to say sorry, but now he said, yes, the emperor's safety is more important than anything else. I will take you away. Chapter 1069. Later, when the great general's soldiers entered the palace, they had already disappeared. Only the 59 to 130 mm cannon, that was still a little warm, could be seen at the back of the palace. Take care of this thing. This is the evidence that the 5-star army wants to persecute this great general. I will go back and ask them for an explanation. Great General Ashikaga Yoshimasa's face flashed with anger. There were often ships of the 5-star army near the Wa Island. Usually they also exchanged business, so their relationship was quite good. But this time, they wanted to use other people's hands to take his life. This was something he couldn't tolerate. He decided to take advantage of this matter and blackmail the 5-star army. It was clear that the navy of the Japanese Empire also had some strength. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was obviously too arrogant. He thought that the 5-star army would be afraid of him. But he didn't know that at this moment, the 5-star army was mobilizing. The source of all the information came from the head of the security bureau in the Japanese Empire. He said that a civil war was imminent, and that they should be prepared. Before the new year, Yang Chendong received the information that the internal relations of the Japanese Empire were tense, and some places had already had internal strife. Since then he had been making all kinds of preparations. Yang Xie's powerful machine began to move. The soldiers, provisions, and people who wanted to migrate were all moving. Now that there was finally definite news, how could he let go of such an opportunity? Although Yang Chendong didn't know if the emperor's faction would kill the general the day before, in his opinion, no matter who won or lost, it would be beneficial to him. This was a move he was going to make. Ashikaga Yoshimasa took the emperor and some of his confidants and left Ping in Beijing. As he wished, Junko sent her trusted Kobayashi, who was her bodyguard when she was in the Great Ming Dynasty. She asked him to leave the army and get a ship to the nearby North Korea to report to the 5-star army for help. After doing this, she followed her imperial father, the empress, her younger brother, and other members of the imperial family to the south under the protection of Oda Nagamasa, and entered the Shanin Road's Onyon area. Xiao Lin found a boat by the sea and came to North Korea. It was already more than 10 days later when he reported to Yang Qindong. Holding the telegram from North Korea in his hand, he didn't look too surprised. However, the cannon did not kill Ashikaga Yoshimasa. This would make it more difficult for him to conquer the Japanese Empire. Fortunately, he had never thought that such a powerful figure would die so easily, so he had already made sufficient preparations. Yang Qindong put the telegram aside and gave the order to Beta Persei, who was following beside him. Order Longwei to get ready to depart. We'll sail to Korea in 2 days. With horses they were called Haiki, and without horses, they were called Longwei. This was an extremely elite, well-equipped, and particularly combat-capable army. They were also the strongest protection around Yang Qindong. Often, wherever they appeared, it meant that Yang Qindong would also appear there. There were only 2 days to prepare, but for an elite army, the time was more than enough. The reason why Yang Qindong left 2 days to make arrangements was that he wanted to take a good look at his son and daughter. His son Yangbo was still too young. Instead of looking at him, it was better to look at his mother, Hu Yan. He talked about his next itinerary and apologized. As the first madam and Yang Qindong's legal wife, Hu Yan was originally a kind and virtuous woman. Although she was very worried, she didn't blame him at all. Instead, she advised Yang Qindong to be careful. She also said that the next time he came back, little Bo should be able to run all over the place. After leaving Hu Yan's palace, Yang Qindong went to see his daughter Lele. In contrast, she was much cuter. As soon as she saw Yang Qindong, she hugged his neck like a wombat and didn't want to come down. She kept calling him father. Yang Qindong also liked Lele very much. He even specially created a song for her. The king brought me to patrol the mountains, saying that she was his little princess. Logically speaking, with his current status, it was really degrading for him to touch and play with these songs. But when did he ever put these customs in his eyes? Just based on this matter, it attracted the envy of many people. The attitude of the servants in the palace towards Lele became more friendly and respectful. Yangxia also had many similarities with other dynasties. For example, the people below were also very understanding. Whoever was favored would be more popular. Fortunately, Yang Qindong also treated the other madams very well. At least he did his best to treat them equally. In addition, Hu Yan, as the legal wife of the princess consort, had no intention of suppressing any of her younger sisters. This allowed the palace to appear to be harmonious. Even if there were some disputes, no one would show it on the surface. Whether the backyard was stable or not was directly related to the situation on the front line. Seeing that the backyard was fine, 2 days later, Yang Qindong took the last 1,000 Longwei to leave on the transport ship and went straight to North Korea. At this time, the Japanese Empire had already started a war, especially in the Onyon area. The army sent by the great general Ashikaga Yoshimasa had already fought with Oda Nagamasa's army. Ashikaga Yoshimasa's reason was dignified. He said that someone had kidnapped the royal family, and he came to rescue them. Oda Nagamasa was also not incompetent. He held the emperor hostage and ordered his vassals. He said that someone wanted to rebel, and he was protecting the emperor. He also asked others to do the same as him, to make their own efforts and contributions to protect the royal family and the emperor. Everyone said that they were right, and everyone said that they were righteous. The two groups of people fought together. The other forces of the Japanese Empire that received the news didn't intervene. If they rashly acted without seeing the result, it was very likely that they would become cannon fodder. No one who could become the leader of a force was a fool. When Yang Qindong arrived in North Korea nearly 20 days later, the situation in the Japanese Empire was already very critical. From the feedback of the intelligence department, it was obvious that the great general's side had the advantage. He had always been in charge of the military and political power of the whole country. Oda Nagamasa was just one of the vassals. Naturally, their strength was not equal. It seemed that he couldn't hold on any longer. The governor of North Korea province, Zhang Yi, had already done the logistics work for the army. Some of the people who came here first were also properly settled by him. When the 5-star army entered the territory of the Japanese Empire and stood firm, he would immediately send people to make sure that they occupied a place. This was to ensure that they didn't go back and forth and didn't cause extra trouble for the army. Yang Chendong praised Governor Zhang Ye's work. Then he called a group of military generals and pointed at Tsushima Island in the Japanese Empire's terrain on the sand table. He said, "This will be our primary target. Commander Su, I will give this task to your army. Is there any problem?" "I promise to complete the task." The new army's commander, Su He, stood at attention and replied confidently. The new army was an army that had just been established. However, it had been more than a year since the establishment of the army. The personnel structure was already very complete, especially the commander, Su He, who was originally a general. Since he was captured by Yang Chendong, he had repeatedly made contributions to the army. Under the leadership of such a strong general, the combat power of the new army had been constantly improving. What they lacked now was actual combat experience. It was because of this that Yang Chendong transferred the new army to the front line this time. It was to give them a good opportunity to fight. In Yang Chendong's eyes, the Japanese Empire was not worthy of being called a big enemy. His real enemy was still the grassland. Su He took the position of the vanguard, which made the other division commanders envious. However, they were just envious. No one dared to disobey the orders of the 6th young master. Besides, the Japanese Empire was also one of the big countries. If they wanted to completely occupy this place, they would have to fight a lot of battles. Everyone was ready to fight. After the order was issued, 2 hours after the meeting, a large number of ships belonging to the 5-star army began to set off. They set off from Pusan, the southernmost part of North Korea, and went straight to Tsushima Island, which was hundreds of nautical miles away. Tsushima Island belonged to the West Hokkaido area of the Japanese Empire. The chief in charge of guarding this place was called Fukushima Nagashi. He had 20,000 soldiers and nearly 100 warships in his hands. It was a well-known force. Because they fought by the sea all year round, this army was very mobile. If they couldn't win, they could just board the ship and escape to the sea. With this, even the orders of the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa were not completely effective here. Fukushima Nagashi was also paying attention to the Battle of Inyun, but in his view, it was just an internal strife for benefits. To put it bluntly, it was a dog-eat-dog fight. No matter who won in the end, it had nothing to do with him. So during this period of time, his days were very leisurely, and he was just a good spectator watching the show. Suddenly one day, a large number of naval forces flying the flag of the 5-star army appeared around Tsushima Island. As soon as they appeared, they surrounded the island in all directions, not leaving a single gap. This situation really scared the Fukushima chief, who had been on the battlefield for a long time. The ones surrounding the island were the C4 and C5 divisions responsible for transporting the new army soldiers. In their eyes, their navy would play a big role in attacking the Japanese Empire. Just like now, no matter who was the vanguard, in the end, the navy would be the first to act. Fire the cannons. The 2 Cold Front Division commanders gave the order almost at the same time. Hundreds of cannons installed in the ships were fired at the Japanese Empire's ships. There were less than 100 ships, facing the attack of 2 elite Cold Front Division commanders. There was no way they could resist. As the ships of the Japanese Empire were sunk or hit, the remaining ships of the Japanese Empire quickly retreated, heading towards the depths of Tsushima Island. "Haha, it's up to our new army now. Pass down the order, prepare to land," Suhi said excitedly. He was afraid that the 2 Cold Front Division commanders would fire directly into the depths of Tsushima Island. If that happened, he wouldn't live up to his name as the vanguard. Fortunately, these people knew how to endure and gave him the opportunity to attack. Chapter 1070. Speaking of which, why wouldn't the 2 commanders of the Cold Front Division want to take down Tsushima Island directly? They also have the strength to do so. However, if the cannons were to fire, They would inevitably kill more people of the Japanese Empire. It wasn't that they couldn't bear to do so. This could be seen from the attitude of the sixth young master towards this place. It seemed like the sixth young master had some resentment towards this place. The reason why they didn't fire the cannons was because they wanted to give the new army a chance to train their soldiers. At the same time, they could also save some cannons. After all, every cannons fired were worth a lot of money. So far, the production rate of cannons was still very low. Moreover, from time to time, substandard products would appear. Cannons had become a very precious item in the army. The soldiers of the new army couldn't wait any longer. As soon as the ship docked, they rushed towards the island like madmen. After losing the ship, Fukushima Nagamasa's combat strength had decreased by more than half. Quick, release the smoke, call for reinforcements. Fukushima Nagamasa, who was forced to retreat back to the island, heard from his subordinates that countless five-star troops had already begun to disembark and fight. Immediately, he was scared out of his wits and screamed in horror. Calling for reinforcements was something he learned from Huaxia. At the time when there was no telecommunications, this method was still somewhat effective. At least, it notified others that there was a foreign invasion on Tsushima Island. However, it was a pity that the five-star army had been planning for a long time. How could they give them any time to breathe? He and his comrades didn't know how many times they had dreamt that they would appear in the Japanese Empire and start a massacre. Now their dreams had finally come true. Yang Qindong's order was to show no mercy. Anyone who resisted would be killed without mercy. It's just a small island nation. How dare they overestimate themselves and spy on Huaxia? How dare they try to swallow an elephant? Now was the time to deal with them. There was no need to be soft-hearted or have any scruples. This was because he was giving them a taste of their own medicine. Moreover, he was paying them back 100 times. The new army entered Tsushima Island in a mighty manner. The 4 cavalry divisions mounted their horses and launched a fierce attack. In front of Fukushima Nagashi's army, which did not possess any firearms, not even the most primitive firearms, the appearance of more than 30,000 cavalrymen was like a tide of beasts, instantly drowning them. The frontmost Japanese army was forced to retreat, suffering heavy casualties. Cavalry had a natural advantage over infantrymen. They were both using cold weapons, but they were destined not to be opponents of the same level. There would only be one result in this clash. The cavalry would slaughter in all directions, and the infantry would be defeated like a mountain. It was the first time for many of the new army soldiers to go to the battlefield, but each of them had undergone at least half a year of hard training before coming here. They had long memorized the things that they should pay attention to. Right now, they were just performing at the level that they had been training for. Facing the Japanese army that had no fighting spirit and only knew how to continuously retreat, even if they were a little flustered, they quickly got used to it. After all, it was the easiest to fight a battle where the wind was blowing. This was the reason why Yang Qindong sent the new army for the first battle. In contrast, the new army had the least amount of combat experience among the 150,000 soldiers he brought with him. This was a chance for them to make up for their shortcomings. It was true that the new army was a new army, but their combat strength was not the weakest. They had been training for a long time, and each soldier carried the hope and future of their family. Compared to the Yishi, and Yishi, their fighting spirit was much stronger. After the victory of the first battle, the new army's morale was high. They lined up on the island and waited for Yang Qindong to inspect them. It was said that morale was built through fighting. The situation on the battlefield was one-sided. The new Third Army had only won a big victory, but it was as if they had been reborn. Many of the new soldiers had successfully accepted the baptism of the battlefield and completed the transformation from new soldiers to veterans. The opponent in this battle was only 20,000 people, and they were not well prepared. Victory is deserved. This was the first sentence that Commander Suhi said after seeing Yang Qindong. Yang Qindong nodded approvingly and said, "Very good. Since that's the case, I'll give you another chance to perform. Next, the new Third Army will cooperate with the other divisions to take down all the territories of the West Sea Road. Are you confident?" "Yes." Suhi just answered instinctively, but then he realized what Yang Qindong meant. He couldn't help but widen his eyes and said, "Don't we have to go to the Onion area first? Princess Junko and the Emperor of the Japanese Empire are there." The Onion area was in the Shanin area. From Tsushima Island, they needed to go north. The West Sea Road was in the east of Tsushima Island. This was a completely different direction. It was no wonder that Suhi was so surprised. "No need. Everything is going according to plan." Yang Chendong had no intention to explain. Or rather, he didn't want to explain anything at all. Only he knew the real reason. He wanted to take advantage of this internal strife to take over the entire Japanese empire. Not only that, he didn't want to take over the Japanese royal family. What a joke. He was going to rule this place in the future. If he left the royal family behind, wouldn't he be tying his hands and feet? Although he could keep the king like the other destroyed forces and countries, he didn't have such thoughts about one nation at all. He hoped that these people would die as soon as possible, so that it would be easier for him to carry out some of his work and plans in one nation. These were just selfish motives. It wasn't something that could be shown in public. On the surface, he had enough reasons. That was Oda Nagamasa's troops in the Onion area couldn't hold on under the attack of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's army. Even if the 5-star army rushed over at full speed, it would still be too late. Since that was the case, it was better to take over the West Sea Road first and let the 5-star army gain a firm foothold. With enough reasons, and the plan was proposed by Yang Chendong. How could the other generals have any objections? What they wanted was nothing more than military exploits and killing enemies on the battlefield to temper themselves. As for where to attack first and where to attack later, they just needed to follow orders. Therefore, after the first battle of capturing Tsushima Island, the 5-star army didn't go north as some of the so-called military strategists of the Japanese Empire expected. Instead, they suddenly went east and entered West Sea Road. Not only did this greatly surprise some people, but it also caught the Japanese army by surprise. Onion area. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was facing the tenacious resistance of Oda Nagamasa. In addition, he received the news that the 5-star army suddenly launched an attack on Tsushima Island. He felt that something bad was going to happen, so he accelerated the attack. In the name of the Supreme General, he mobilized troops from all over the country to launch a fierce siege. For a time, Oda Nagamasa's troops suffered heavy losses and were in imminent danger. Junko was in a small courtyard assigned to her, and her face was full of anxiety. She also heard the news that the 5-star army appeared on Tsushima Island. She wasn't angry about the sudden invasion of an alien race. Instead, she was somewhat happy. According to the time, Kobayashi should have just arrived in North Korea not long ago. Didn't this mean that he still had her in his heart? While she was happy in her heart, she was also worried. Junko didn't know if he could really save her. After all, from the current situation, this place was already very dangerous. Once Ashikaga Yoshimasa attacked this place first, she, the emperor, empress, and her brother would be forced to become hostages. They might even have to live a life worse than before. At that time, even if he wanted to attack, he should have some scruples. Junko had to say that she was thinking too much. You Japanese Empire people are holding your own emperor to threaten who? Yang Chendong is just an outsider. Why would he be afraid of such a threat? Once a woman fell in love, her IQ would also drop. Junko was like this. She optimistically thought that the 5-star army came to save her. While she was looking forward to it, another woman appeared beside her, temporarily breaking this unrealistic idea. Princess. The woman who appeared beside Junko was good-looking, especially with a very graceful figure. Yoshiko, why are you here? Junko looked at the woman who came to her side and asked with a smile. She knew this woman. Her name was Yoshiko, and she was a geisha in the royal family. With her good dancing and perfect figure, she attracted the emperor's interest. After being introduced to her, she was specially invited to the palace. Because they were about the same age, they quickly became familiar with each other. Many times, Junko even thought that she and Yoshiko had more in common, which also made the relationship between the two sides much closer. Usually, Yoshiko would find time to chat with Junko. Although one was a princess, and the other was a geisha, The current royal family was so weak that there was no particularly obvious concept of hierarchy, so the two sides talked happily. Seeing Yoshiko appear, Junko thought that she was afraid and wanted to talk to her to reduce her fear. So after greeting her, Junko said with a smile, "Well, you don't have to worry. This princess tells you that the 5-star army is here, and I believe that it won't take long for them to arrive here. At that time, we will be safe." Seeing Junko's yearning look, Yoshiko interrupted her fantasy and said in fluent Japanese, "I'm afraid that the 5-star army won't be able to save the princess." Wait, what are you saying? Junko looked at the usually petite Yoshiko who suddenly said such words, and her tone was so confident. For a moment, Junko was stunned and asked as if she didn't know Yoshiko. "I said that the 5-star army won't be able to save the princess." Yoshiko opened her mouth again. But this time, she didn't say it in Japanese, but in very standard Chinese. Junko's face was full of surprise and she pointed at Yoshiko and said, How can you speak Chinese?" Chapter 1071. In the Japanese Empire, although it could be said that they were separated from the Han people, Qin Shi Huang sent Su Fu to bring 500 boys and girls to Japan, and that was how the Japanese Empire came to be. This saying was not only in the Ming Dynasty, but also in the Japanese Empire. However, there were very few people in the Japanese Empire who could speak Chinese. After all, this was an island country, and without many opportunities to interact with the outside world, this foreign language was really not very useful. That was why Junko was so surprised. In fact, after she returned to the country, other than the captain of the guards, Kobayashi, this was the first person who spoke Chinese to her. Junko was still surprised, and Tomiko opened her mouth again. "Because I am a Han person, I can naturally speak Chinese. Not only that, but I was also sent by the 6th young master to protect the princess. Oh, by the way, this is a token. I believe the princess will believe me when she sees it." Tomiko took out a portrait, and it was a portrait of Junko, and it was Junko wearing a Ming Dynasty uniform. Judging from the clothes she was wearing, it should be the clothes and appearance she wore when she was studying in the Yang Family Academy. Looking at the portrait in her hand, it seemed as if she was thinking of the happy times she had in the Yang Family Academy. It was impossible for someone without that kind of experience to draw such a picture. Junko raised her head again. At this moment, she already believed that Tomiko was sent by him, but she was still a little curious about the purpose of Tomiko's appearance. You are not from the Japanese Empire and you are not a geisha. What is your identity?" "The princess is right. I am not a geisha. That is just a way to hide my identity and make you accept me. My real identity is the intelligence director of the CIA stationed in the Japanese Empire. As for the name Tomiko, it sounds very nice. I like it very much." When it was time to show her cards, Tomiko said without hesitation. Revealing her identity was just the beginning, and it was just for the next plan. If she couldn't gain Junko's trust, it would be difficult to carry out the next many tasks. Tomiko's honesty won Junko's favor. More importantly, she knew that all the arrangements were made by Yang Chendong, which was enough to prove that he still cared about her. Especially when she thought that Tomiko's appearance meant that she and her father would be safer. She said happily, "Since that's the case, are you here to save you?" "Yes, the princess is right. But that's not entirely correct. I only want to save the princess, not all of you." Tomiko's expression returned to indifference, as if she had taken the lead from this moment on. "Save me? It's just me." "Yes." Tomiko nodded again. "That won't do. If you want to save them, you have to save my father, mother, and brother as well," Junko said stubbornly. "Impossible." Tomiko shook her head. "With my ability, I can only escape with the princess. As for the Emperor, Empress, and Prince Run Chunren, they will be fine. No matter who has the advantage in the end, their safety should be guaranteed. At most, the environment will be a little bad. But as long as the princess can see the 6th young master and ask for his permission, it is only a matter of time before they are saved." Tomiko had her own mission, and now that she was surrounded by enemies, she didn't have the ability to save more people. She was able to take Junko away because she had done a lot of preparation before, so she had the confidence to do so. Junko, who originally wanted to continue to refuse, fell into deep thought. Of course, she knew that Tomiko's words were reasonable, but she still couldn't bear to let her leave her father, mother, and brother like this. Princess, as long as you stay by the sixth young master's side and urge him all the time, it will be possible for the 5-star army to complete the rescue mission. Otherwise, without help, who do you think will be so active? Tomiko thought of Yang Chendong's instructions before she left, so she followed his words. This sentence finally had an effect. Yang Chendong knew Junko well, and Tomiko's words also had an effect, so Junko nodded and agreed. Okay, I promise you, but I have to say goodbye to my father, mother, and brother. Okay, but please be quick. Gongzi still has more than 2 hours, and we will leave here at night. Tomiko agreed. This was something she had prepared for a long time. With her understanding of Junko, some things must be done. Junko went to see her father, who was also the 102nd emperor of the Japanese Empire, Emperor Hirito of the Garden. After seeing her father, Junko didn't hide anything and told him that Yang Chendong sent people to save her. Father, you have suffered, but as long as you hold on for a while, I will definitely persuade him to send troops quickly and save you. Junko's words also frightened Emperor Hirito. He didn't expect that he only stayed because he saw Tomiko's good dancing skills, and this coincidence was actually arranged by him in advance. He really didn't know what that person didn't know. Because of this, he also had a sense of fear. Once this kind of smart person had an idea about the Japanese Empire, would he allow him to continue to exist? He was already an obstacle on the other side's way. The best way to deal with an obstacle was to kick it aside, or even eliminate it directly. Since this Bugnam of Gojoseon of the Great Ming Dynasty had calculated everything, how could he not see this step? If so, wouldn't he be in danger? Emperor Hirito really wanted to tell this matter to his daughter, but he still held back. Since his daughter liked that man very much, then he would let her obtain her own happiness. There were some words that would only hurt feelings if spoken out loud. And most importantly, with his daughter as a link, even if the Japanese Empire was heavily damaged by the 5-star army in the future, as a father, he could more or less benefit from it. Thinking of this, for his own benefit, Emperor Hirito said, Father can see that he likes you very much. Since that's the case, then be with him. And then use his power to promote the power of our emperor, and benefit the people of the Japanese Empire. Her father agreed, and he was still so supportive of her. Junko's face was filled with joy. Yes, father, Junko promises you. When she said this, there was a trace of shyness on Junko's face, but she did not know that this was the last time she saw her father. Everything that happened after that was completely unexpected. When Yang Chendong received the news that the emperor of the harem was killed, he was also surprised. After all, Yang Chendong did not really want to kill this person, even if it was for Junko's sake. He just wanted to use this war to completely weaken the influence of the imperial family on the Japanese Empire. Unlike the leaders of other occupied countries and regions, they would quietly hide people and tell others that they were dead, so as to cut off some people's thoughts, and let them live a peaceful life in private. But often, plans were not as fast as changes. Back to the present. With her father's consent and blessing, Junko quietly left the compound with Tomiko when it was dark. Tomiko had already prepared for all of this. First, she got 2 sets of men's clothes, and with the help of some things, the 2 beauties quickly became 2 middle-aged Japanese Empire men. Then, under the cover of night and the protection of the CIA in the dark, they left the Onion area. In order not to be discovered, Tomiko even found a woman who looked similar to Princess Junko. She spent a lot of money to find this woman from the Japanese Empire, in order to delay the discovery of the princess's disappearance. The plan went smoothly. Junko was just a girl. In the eyes of Oda Nagamasa, her status was far less important than the emperor and his son, Prince Seiji. She was even less important than Empress Tengara. Junko, who was just a marginal figure, successfully left. Under the unified plan of Yang Chendong, the 5-star army didn't attack the Mountain Sun Path. Instead, they suddenly attacked the West Sea Path. The Chikuhu area, Feiho area, Oyu area, and Fengho area were successively attacked by the 150,000 five-star army in multiple ways. Faced with either long guns, short cannons, armored cavalry, elite soldiers, or a sea of soldiers, the defenseless West Sea Path quickly fell. Finally, the army gathered in the Fengqian area, which was the border between the West Sea Path and the Mountain Sun Path, and it only took 13 days. In 10 days, they took down one of the 7 major areas of Wu Nation. Of course, it was because they were caught off guard. It was also because the West Sea Road was on the edge of the Wu Nation, so the defense force was weak. But it also proved the strength of the five-star army. After 13 days, the five-star army gathered again, and prepared to attack the Mountain Sun Path and Nagato area from the Fengqian area. The various armies, divisions, and regiments quickly gathered. Behind them, the 500,000 Han people and other foreigners from the Korean province were already in place. They were occupying and digesting the entire West Sea Path. At the same time, some of the Japanese Empire's citizens in the West Sea Path were also forced to board the five-star army's transport ships. They were going to leave this place and go to other provinces under the Yangtze's control. For them, many of them might not be able to return to this place for the rest of their lives. The five-star army obviously came prepared. However, the Japanese Empire's General Ashikaga Yoshimasa wasn't an idiot. After 13 days, under his fierce attack, Oda Nagamasa was finally defeated. He died, and some of his soldiers were killed. Most of them surrendered and became captives. This included the emperor, his empress, and his son Prince Naruhito. The only regret was that Junko was missing. They only found a girl who looked like her. But it was only a girl who went missing. For the Japanese Empire, who valued boys over girls, it wasn't a big deal. Chapter 1072. The most important thing was that the Emperor of Japan was now in his hands again. General Ashikaga Yoshimasa was very happy. He sent Kayome Sakuki to bring the Emperor of Japan and his family back to the palace in Ping and Beijing. After that, he began to gather more people to prepare for the battle with the five-star army. At the same time, he also wanted to see what reason Yang Qindong would use to start a war in the Japanese Empire if he couldn't save the Emperor of Japan. He could even see that Yang Qindong had no choice but to retreat. He was even prepared to beat the dog while it was down, and take the opportunity to ask for compensation and other demands. The Japanese Empire was an independent island country. It had a large army and a strong navy. It wasn't like other small countries that could be destroyed easily. Their territory wasn't small, and they had a large population. If they wanted to escape, they could hide anywhere in the ocean. Even if they couldn't win, they could still escape. They could find an opportunity to come back and take revenge. This was where his confidence came from. It was also why he didn't show any signs of cowardice when facing the five-star army. All these years, Ashikaga Yoshimasa had been in charge of the military and political power. This made his influence very large. Although some of the counties and villages under him had started to have internal strife for benefits. However, the appearance of the five-star army put an end to this situation. When facing an external enemy, the people of the Japanese Empire were still able to grasp the situation clearly. They began to unite around the Japanese Empire's upper echelons with the general as the core. According to the information from the front lines, the Japanese army in the Sanyang Road had a total of 400,000 people. It was nearly 3 times the number of people of the five-star army. In addition, the enemy was familiar with the environment and had sufficient provisions. A tough battle was unavoidable. If it was other forces facing such difficulties, they would have a headache. They would have to consider whether or not it was the right decision to send troops this time. However, in the eyes of Yang Qindong and the five-star army, this was nothing. They were used to fighting against the wind. Wasn't the five-star army developed like this? Looking at the history of the five-star army's growth, which time did they not win against the many? Which time did they not give people the feeling that they were the weak? It was just a Japanese empire. For the generals of the five-star army who had experienced hundreds of battles, this was nothing. Just like now, in Yang Qindong's tent, 1st Cavalry Division Commander Tian, who knew Army Commander Su He, C4 Division Commander Ding Yan, and C5 Division Commander He Gong were standing in a row, taking the initiative to ask for battle. The more difficult the battle was, the more one could prove one's ability by winning. When they saw that the Japanese Empire had deployed 400,000 soldiers, they all saw an opportunity. Division Commander Ding, Division Commander He can forget about it. Using the Navy as an army is an arrangement that can only be made when there is no other way. Yang Chendong opened his mouth and directly removed the C Division 4 and C Division 5 from the team. Sixth Young Master, we. The two teachers were still indignant and wanted to continue fighting. You what? Do you know that the Japanese Empire has 300,000 soldiers? Your two divisions added together only have 10,000 soldiers. Isn't such a big piece of meat enough for you to chew on? Seeing that the two teachers still wanted to say something, Yang Chendong's words suppressed them and made them unable to argue. But in the blink of an eye, the two teachers heard something different. Sixth Young Master, are you saying that the 300,000 Japanese Naval Division will be dealt with by our C Division 4 and C Division 5? The one who asked this question was the C Division 4 Division Commander Ding Yan. In response, Yang Chendong rolled his eyes and said, "Not only you, there are also 20,000 North Korean Navy. They will be under your command and cooperate with the operation. Of course, if it turns out that you can't suppress the Japanese Naval Division, then this young master will have to consider transferring people from the Navy Command Headquarters." No need, no need. We have no problem. The C Division 4 Division Commander Ding Yan immediately waved his hand, as if he could just leave it to them. Yes, Sixth Young Master, we are willing to make a military pledge. The C Division 5 Division Commander said seriously. Yes, we are willing to make a military pledge. The C Division Commander Ding Yan also reacted and immediately stood at attention. Yang Chendong waved his hand and didn't ask them to make a military pledge because he believed that these two teachers would do their best to prove themselves. Besides, the C Division 4 and C Division 5 Division were fully equipped with firearms and had experienced many battles. They could be called elite soldiers. If they still couldn't deal with the Japanese Naval Division, then he really had to consider whether these two were qualified for their current positions. After the two teachers left, there was still a commander and a division commander standing in front of him. Facing their eager eyes, Yang Chendong still refused and said, "I know what you mean, but this time you can't take the lead. Leave it to the foreign races. They also need to be sharpened." Yang Chendong's words blocked the mouths of Tian Hu and Su He. The two of them also knew that the sixth young master was doing this for their own good. Besides, the Japanese Empire didn't only have 400,000 soldiers in front of them. There would be many more opportunities to fight big battles in the future. The two of them didn't say anything else and left the tent. After sending away the four generals, Yang Chendong called the three division commanders of the Yushur Division, the Yushur Division, and the Yushur Division. He told them that the next task of attacking the Mountain Sun Path would be given to them. Looking at the three division commanders, Niu Duo, Tu Hai, and Luan Xiaojiang, the sixth young master said sincerely, "This is your chance to show off. Just do it. If you all die, this young master will replace you." Yang Chendong had always cherished the lives of his soldiers. Sometimes, in order to reduce the number of casualties, he would personally charge into the enemy lines. However, Yang Chendong always had a different view of the foreign races. This was an army formed for benefits, for the sake of standing out, and for the sake of a better future. Their starting point wasn't necessarily honorable. They didn't even have a sense of identity with him. Many of them had fallen because of him. If an army like this was too strong, who knew if it would become a gunpowder barrel at any time and blow him up? For people with such experiences, if they could die on the battlefield, it would be a good ending. It would dispel Yang Chendong's worries about them. And it would also ensure that the territory under Yang Xie's rule would be more stable and harmonious. Of course, although these people had impure intentions, from a righteous point of view, they were fighting for him and for the five-star army. Therefore, Yang Chendong was still willing to give them a chance. He wanted them to perform well on the battlefield. If they were really capable, he believed that they would shine brightly. However, most people wouldn't be so lucky. Yang Chendong made a promise in front of the 3 division commanders. He also said that more foreign races were gathering in Korea. It wouldn't be long before they arrived at the Japanese Empire and joined the battle. In other words, no matter how the battle was, their positions as division commanders wouldn't be shaken. Even if they were all killed, they could quickly rebuild. With this promise, Nyo Duo and the other 2 had nothing to be afraid of. In front of Yang Chendong, they said that they would do their best to inflict more damage to the Japanese army and show that the 5-star army wasn't afraid of death and hardships. Beta Persei, who was standing on the side, heard all the conversation. When Nyo Duo and the other 2 left with excited faces, he finally couldn't help but ask, "Young master, with just these 3 divisions, I'm afraid they won't be a match for the 400,000 troops of the Japanese Empire." Who said they were a match? Listening to such a short but straightforward answer, Beta Persei was stunned. Seeing that Beta Persei didn't speak, Yang Chendong smiled and said, "What? Are you very suspicious?" Since they knew that they were no match for them, why would they send these 3 foreign divisions to die on the battlefield? Yes. Beta Persei did think so in his heart, but there were some things that he couldn't ask. He didn't even think that the young master would really answer him. Yang Chendong still answered, "The time isn't right. We are invading for no reason now. We don't have enough reason. It's okay to fight a smooth battle, but once the situation is not good, then problems may arise at any time, so we still need to wait." As for what they were waiting for, Yang Chendong didn't say it clearly, and Beta Persei naturally didn't ask more. Of course, he didn't know that Yang Chendong had another idea, and that was the army of the Japanese Empire, especially their samurai army and ninja army. Their strength couldn't be underestimated. Yang Chendong would value people with ability. He still had a great dream to achieve. Of course, unifying the Asian region was not his goal. Now, unifying the Asian region and integrating the energy here to make sufficient preparations to attack other regions was what he wanted. If the main elite force was sent out at once, the casualties on both sides would not be small. This was not what he wanted to see. What he wanted was more captives, more people who could be used by him. Naturally, the timing was also very important. Next, Yang Chendong asked Beta Persei to find the captain of the Wolf Fang Special Forces, Taihu. Some of the following things needed to be done secretly. For example, the 3 foreign divisions were the vanguard. That was a battle on the surface, but in the dark, they needed the powerful Wolf Fang to take action. No one knew what Yang Chendong talked to Taihu about. They only knew that after an hour, the captain left. Soon after, teams of Wolf Fang were sent out in different directions to various parts of the Japanese Empire. Ishikami District, under the jurisdiction of the Japanese Empire's Shanin Province, adjacent to the Shanyang Province's Anyun District. In a small town called Jongda in Ishikami District, 2 young men were squatting under the eaves of a very ordinary house, each holding a broken bowl, and begging the pedestrians along the street. Under their ragged clothes, the backs of the 2 people looked a little thin and pitiful. There were rich people in every area, and naturally there were poor people. Beggars could be seen everywhere in Jongda City, which was not rich. These 2 little beggars didn't attract any attention. Even when the patrolling soldiers on the street passed by them, they would never give them a second glance. Chapter 1073. Thus, the 2 beggars stayed on the main street in an ostentatious manner. Of course, no one would know that they were the princess of the Japanese Empire, Junko, and the manager of the CIA in the Japanese Empire, Yoshiko, who had escaped from the Anyun area. Under the secret protection of the CIA operatives, the 2 of them walked out of the Anyun area and came to the neighboring Jongda city. They came to a place that had been prepared for a long time. But what was unexpected was that because the 5-star army only took 13 days to conquer the entire West Sea Road, it caused the Japanese army in other areas to be nervous. They increased the intensity of their patrols, and for any foreigners who suddenly appeared for any reason, they would strictly investigate them, fearing that they were spies sent by the 5-star army. Because of this, the previous safe place could no longer be used. And in order to not attract attention and not have any accidents during the investigation, Yoshiko suggested that they disguise themselves as beggars to avoid all the dangers. After all, Junko was a princess of a country. Even when she was in the capital of Baiming, no one wronged her. But now in her own country, she had to disguise herself as a beggar that everyone avoided, so she had some complaints. But Yoshiko said, "If you want to take revenge and successfully see the sixth young master, you can only do this. Otherwise, you will be taken away and become one of the threats to the sixth young master." At that time, not only would it be difficult to take revenge, but her life would also be in danger. After weighing the pros and cons, Junko agreed. Now she stretched out her small hands and squatted on the street with Yoshiko. The two squatted together, paying attention to the pedestrians on the street. When they found that no one was staring at them, Junko whispered, "We have been begging here for 10 days. When will it end? Will Sensei really send someone to pick us up? Why do I feel that I am getting more and more used to my current role?" Hearing Junko's complaint, Yoshiko's expression didn't change. Instead, she explained very patiently, "Don't worry, the news has already been spread. The sixth young master will definitely not ignore it. Maybe it won't be long before the people who will save us appear. All we have to do now is wait patiently." Tomiko didn't want to dress up as a beggar, but she had no choice. There were only 6 CIA operatives around them. Once they were discovered, they would be in a very dangerous situation. They had no choice but to do so. However, Tomiko was willing to accept all of this. She had already found out through some channels that the sixth young master was very good to Tomiko. Although it was said to be a teacher-student relationship, it was naturally different from an ordinary teacher-student relationship. This could be seen from the fact that the sixth young master had led troops to appear when the civil strife in Neon had not ended yet. Tomiko also heard that the sixth young master seemed to have a good impression of this foreign princess. What's more, some people said that the sixth young master once had the idea of marrying Tomiko. If all of this was true, then wouldn't her future be infinitely bright since she and Junko had gone through thick and thin together? Because of this, Tomiko was very patient with Junko. Even if they both became beggars, she didn't show the slightest resentment or dissatisfaction. Listening to Tomiko's answer, she thought that even an outsider could accompany her. What else could she be dissatisfied with? What else could she complain about? At that moment, she stretched out her dirty little hand again, as if she was going to order a meal. Time passed day by day. 2 days later, the two women were walking on the streets of Zhongda City, looking for a place to hide today. Suddenly, an accident happened. A gust of wind suddenly blew. Caught off guard, the two women were blown by the wind. Their clothes were blown by the wind, and the broken hat on their head was blown away, revealing their beautiful black hair. At this time, a group of 30 Japanese Empire patrols passed by and saw the scene. After the wind passed, the two women were surrounded. "Who are you?" the leader of the Japanese Empire squad asked in Japanese. We are refugees. Because we encountered bandits, our families were all killed. We sisters have no choice but to live on the streets." Facing the approaching patrols of the Japanese Empire, Tomiko stood up. From the initial panic to calmness, it only took her a breath or two. There shouldn't be any problem with this answer. The only problem was that they were two women, and their figures were quite good, although their faces were covered with ashes, and it was impossible to see their faces. They were young and had a good figure. Didn't they see that the patrols of the Japanese Empire had evil smiles on their faces? Oh my, it's actually two women. And bring them back to the barracks and investigate their origins, the patrol leader said with a lewd look. His eyes had already looked up and down at Tomiko and Tomiko several times. Obviously, bringing them back for investigation was fake, and it was likely that they were doing something improper. Not only did the two women understand this, but even the people of the Japanese Empire who were watching on the streets understood this. It was just that on one side were 30 well-trained soldiers of the Japanese Empire, and on the other side were two women who they didn't know at all, who would stand up for them. The people seemed to know what was going to happen next. One by one, they turned around and left. They were afraid that if they stayed any longer, they would be implicated and taken away. This made the soldiers of the Japanese Empire even more daring. In broad daylight, they surrounded them and were ready to take action. Tomiko was already trembling with nervousness. It was true that she was the princess of the One Nation. Even if the royal family was in decline, she was still a princess. No one would do anything to her so blatantly. It was the first time she had encountered such a situation. What should she do? What should she do? She also didn't know what to do. She could only tightly grab Tomiko's arm and curl her body into a ball. Tomiko's situation wasn't much better. She was assigned to work in the Japanese Empire after professional training. She was already prepared to encounter danger, and even sacrifice her life. But the problem was that she wasn't the only one in danger. The princess was next to her. If it were her, she might have pretended to be obedient. In order to survive, she didn't mind accompanying these stinky men. As a female intelligence agent, she was already mentally prepared for this kind of thing. Something could happen to her, but Tomiko couldn't. She was the person who the sixth young master wanted. If something happened to her, how was she going to explain it to her superiors? How was the entire CIA going to explain it to the sixth young master? She couldn't avoid it, and she couldn't avoid it. Tomiko made up her mind. She bit her lip and suddenly raised her right leg to kick the patrol captain who was closest to her. To be able to enter the CIA, even a woman had to go through some military training to ensure that she had the ability to protect herself in a critical moment. Tomiko made her move. She kicked the opponent's crotch. The opponent gritted his teeth and sucked in a cold breath. His face was very ugly. It was obvious how serious the consequences were. For a moment, the other patrol soldiers were frozen in place. Obviously, they didn't expect that the two weak women would dare to fight back when surrounded by fierce soldiers. Could it be that they weren't as simple as ordinary beggars? Take them back. Another deputy captain was the first to come back to his senses. He took over the captain's position and gave the order. More than 20 patrolling soldiers agreed and prepared to besiege them. Then an accident happened. An arrow suddenly pierced through the air and hit the back of a Japanese Empire patrol soldier. The powerful force directly penetrated the soldier's body. Plop. The Japanese Empire soldier who fell to the ground still had a pained expression on his face. His mouth opened and closed as if he wanted to say something. Obviously, he wasn't completely dead yet. This scene also shocked the other Japanese Empire patrol soldiers. They pulled out their swords and stood back to back, guarding against any danger that might appear at any time and the arrows that might come out of nowhere. This situation lasted for 7 or 8 breaths of time. When they didn't see any more people or danger, the captain who had been kicked in the crotch had almost recovered. At least, he was able to speak. Take these 2 people back. If they resist, I don't care if they live or die. One soldier had already died. The captain was really angry and made up his mind. The 2 Japanese Empire patrol soldiers who received the order came forward. They wanted to reach out and grab Tomiko and Tomiko. At this moment, the arrows that had disappeared earlier appeared again. However, because they were prepared, not only did they not hit anyone, but they also exposed their position. They were discovered by the Japanese Empire soldiers who were watching their surroundings. Then they swarmed forward to capture them. There were only 6 CIA operatives around Tomiko. They were only responsible for providing cover. They weren't the best at fighting. With 6 people against 30 people, they were obviously outnumbered. In a short period of time, the 6 people who showed their heads were surrounded. One of them had already been cut down and died after being stabbed several times. The situation was very dangerous. There was no way these 6 people could protect themselves. Tomiko anxiously turned around and looked at Tomiko. It seemed as if she was asking for something. Tomiko understood. Tomiko wanted her to reveal her identity. However, she didn't think this would work. Her identity might be useful against people with status. However, to ordinary Japanese Empire soldiers, she was no threat at all. The difference in status between the 2 sides was too great. Not only that, but she might also bring shame to the imperial family by revealing her identity. Once her identity as a princess was exposed, and she was blasphemed by ordinary Japanese Empire soldiers, she wouldn't be able to rest in peace even if she died. Tomiko shook her head and refused Tomiko's suggestion to reveal her identity. Okay, then let's die together. At least we can be companions on the road to the afterlife. Tomiko's voice was a little sad. Then she became determined. When she came to carry out the mission, she had mentally prepared herself for this. Now that she was willing to die to protect Tomiko, she was sure that the sixth young master would treat her family well. It could be considered a worthy death. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.